An hour before they laughed at me, I was the happiest I would ever be. That is the part I have never quite forgiven. Not the laughing, the hoping. I woke on the morning of my 12th birthday, certain that today was the day the world would finally agree with the picture I carried of myself. And I lay in bed, grinning at the ceiling like an idiot who had already won. I had rehearsed the moment so many times, it felt like a memory instead of a wish. The priest would read something bright. The strong people in the room would turn to look. My parents would finally wear the face I had been trying to earn my whole life. Where I come from, your 12th birthday is the day you find out who you are. You go to the church, you stand in front of the priest, and the rite reveals two things. First, your skill aptitude, the rank that decides how high you are allowed to climb. Then, your original skill, the one ability you were born with, the thing that is only yours. The ranks run from the bottom up. F for the common and the forgettable, then E, D, C, B, A, and at the very top, the letters that belong to legends. Heroes and sages stand at S. The old demon lord, they say, stood higher than that, gods higher still. Your aptitude is your ceiling. With a good one, you can become almost anything. With a bad one, the door shuts before you ever reach for it. I had been told my whole life to expect something good. My parents had paid for it, after all. The hall was full when I arrived. Not just families, adventurers, a dozen of them and more, leaning against the cold pillars with their arms crossed, watching the children file in with the patient, appraising look of men at a market. That was the other half of the ceremony nobody put on the invitations. The strong ones came to scout. When a promising aptitude came up, they moved fast to claim the talent before a rival party could, and a child could walk out of that church with a future already signed. I remember looking at them and thinking, by lunch, some of you will be looking at me. The priest was an old man with a beard that reached his chest. He called my name, and I stepped forward so quickly I nearly caught my foot on the altar step. My voice came out bright and certain when I answered him, eager, a boy sure of his welcome. I want you to remember that I sounded like that, because it is the last time I did for a long while. He laid his hand on the stone and began the rite, and a board of pale light unfolded in the air in front of me, the way it does for everyone. He read my aptitude first, then he stopped, right in the middle of the word, his mouth still open, and he pressed the back of his hand to his lips to smother something. It took me a full breath to understand that what he was smothering was a laugh. The rank he finally said was G. There is no G on the chart. The chart stops at FG is the joke you make about a result so low it should not exist. A punchline with no real number behind it. And the priest had just said it out loud, in a church, in front of every strong person in the city, about me. The laughter started somewhere in the back and rolled forward like a wave breaking. The adventurers who had come to claim talent found something better to do with their morning. They jeered. They said I had set a record, that no one had ever scored that low, that they pitied whatever sad little life I still thought I could build with a rank like that. One of them laughed so hard he had to lean on the man beside him. I stood there in the middle of it and let it break over me, because there was nothing else a person could do. The priest, to whatever credit he deserves, kept going. He named my original skill in the same flat, amused voice he had used for the rank. Skill duplication. Nobody stopped laughing. A useless rank and a skill no one had ever heard do a single thing worth hearing about, all in one breath. To the room, it was the punchline after the punchline, and they took it that way. But the board did something then, something small, something only I was close enough to see. When the priest named the skill, the line for it did not go dark the way I expected, the way a dead, decorative skill is supposed to. It logged. It sat there in the same pale light as every real skill, marked active, marked present, marked working, only without a rank beside it, as if it were already doing something, quietly, underneath all that noise, and simply had not been asked yet. I did not understand it. I was 12, and an entire church was laughing at me, and I could barely keep breathing, let alone reason out a thing the rite itself had glossed over. The light faded, and the moment went with it, and I told myself I had imagined it. A trick of a wet eye. I had not imagined it. I just did not know yet that the worst morning of my life had also handed me the only thing I would ever need. I walked home telling myself it could still be fixed. That is a thing you learn about hope. It does not die when it should. It keeps getting back up, bloodied, stupid, insisting. The whole way back, I built little arguments in my head, the way you rehearse a case before a judge you are afraid of. An unranked original skill could be something special. Everyone said so. The rank did not have to be the end of the story. And my parents would understand, because they were my parents, and and that word was supposed to come with a guarantee printed somewhere inside it. They were waiting in the front room, both of them. My father and my mother had been adventurers once. Rank B, the pair of them. A respectable result. The kind that lets you retire in a good house and tell the story at dinner for the rest of your life. They had raised me the way a careful man tends a field he expects to harvest. Tutors. Good gear before I was old enough to use it. The right food, the right clothes, and never once a day when I was allowed to forget what any of it had cost. So they were sitting there with the particular brightness of people who have made an investment and come to collect the return. My mother asked first, "What did you draw?" I told them. The aptitude was G. The skill was skill duplication. I watched the brightness go out of both their faces at the same moment, like a single candle pinched between two fingers, and what rushed in to fill the dark was not sadness. There was no grief in it at all. It was a fury, clean and immediate, the fury of a man who has just watched his money burn. My father was on his feet before I finished the sentence. Every coin he had ever spent keeping me fed and clothed and tutored, he said, all those years of it had been money poured straight down a drain. My mother did not even raise her voice, which was somehow worse. She said quietly that she should have known better than to waste good money on a child like me. And then, between the two of them, they said the thing I still hear on bad nights in their exact voices. A child with the worst aptitude the world had ever recorded was no child of theirs. That was the whole conversation. There was no second half to it, no softening, no door left cracked open. They told me to get out, and when I did not move fast enough to suit them, they made it very clear that they meant now, today, with what I had on my body and nothing else. I did not argue. I want to tell you I said something on my way out, something sharp enough to leave a mark, but I did not have it in me, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I just looked at the two people who were supposed to catch me no matter how far I fell, and I understood, all at once, and far too late, that they had never once been planning to catch me. They had been planning to collect. The love had always had a price written on it in small letters at the bottom, and the ceremony had simply read the price out loud, and the number was 0. So I walked out of the only home I had ever had, and the door shut behind me with a sound much smaller than a thing like that should make. I stood in the street for a while. I am not proud of how long. There is a kind of crying you do, where no sound comes out and your shoulders never move, where the only sign of it is that the cobbles in front of your feet go soft and double. I did that until I was finished with it, and then I made myself stop, because crying was a thing the boy from this morning did, and that boy had hoped, and I had just watched in detail where hoping got a person. I had no money, no bed, no name worth saying out loud, because the name had just been taken back along with everything else. I went through what was left to me, the way you check your pockets after a bad fall, expecting nothing, and there was exactly one thing in there, the Adventurers Guild. It was the single door in the whole city that did not care what the priest had said about me. I knew that much, the way every child knows it. The guild registered anyone without a criminal record, and it paid for work honestly done without docking a copper for low aptitude. A party could refuse me, sure. People could line up to refuse me, and given the morning, I assumed they would. But the guild itself, the institution, would write my name in its book, the same as it wrote a hero's, and then let me earn whatever I turned out to be strong enough to earn. It was not much of a plan. With a G aptitude, the highest skill I could ever grind my way up to was E, and E is barely a step above nothing. By every rule the world had just finished showing me, I was finished before I had started. But standing in that empty street with my face still wet, I made myself a promise that did not ask the world's permission. I would climb anyway. Not because I believed I could. I want to be honest about that, because it matters later. I did not believe it, not even a little. I made the promise precisely because I could not believe it. Because a thing you decide when the odds are laughing at you is the only kind of thing that is truly yours. And underneath all the wreckage of the day, that strange flicker on the board kept turning over in the back of my mind. Patient, refusing to be filed away. Active, working, waiting. I did not know what it meant. I decided, standing there, that I was going to find out if it killed me. Then I wiped my face on my sleeve and went looking for the guild. The guild was loud and bright, and smelled of old wood and warm bread, and I stood in the doorway feeling like something the rain had washed in off the street. I made myself walk to the counter anyway. The young woman behind it looked up at me, and I braced. After the morning I had had, I was braced for all of it. I expected the same smothered laugh the priest had given me, the same sneer, the same quick arithmetic that started with a glance and ended with me being worth nothing. I did not get it. "Welcome," she smiled like she meant it, which I had stopped expecting from anyone. "Are you here to register?" I told her I wanted to become an adventurer. It came out smaller and more uncertain than I wanted it to. And if she noticed, she had the grace to pretend she had not. Her name was Claire. She brought out a stack of documents thick enough to prop a door, and she walked me through every page of it, patient, never hurrying me along, never once asking the question I kept flinching ahead of, the question about my aptitude. When the paperwork was finished, she slid a small magical tool across the counter and asked me to rest my hand on it. That was the one moment my nerve went out from under me. The tool checked for a criminal record, she explained. Standard for everyone, nothing to be afraid of. And I was afraid of it anyway, because that was the lesson the day had been teaching me in every room I walked into. The world could decide you were guilty of a thing you had never done, could write you off in a single breath, and all you could do was stand there with your hand out and wait for the verdict. I set my hand on the tool and waited for it to call me a liar too. It came back clean. There, she lifted the tool away, all clear. Then she explained how the ranks worked, and I let myself listen properly for the first time all day. Every adventurer carries a card, she said, and the color of the card is the rank you hold. You start at the very bottom, at F, and you climb by taking jobs, finishing them, and letting the guild see with its own eyes what you can do. F, then E, D, C, B, A, and at the top, the color almost nobody ever earns in a whole life, S. I kept waiting for the catch, for the aptitude clause, for the line in the rules that would shut the door the way every other door had shut today. It never came. There was no ceiling written into the card. There was only the work, and the proof, and the next rank up. I told her I understood. I told her I knew exactly how it worked, and that I was going to climb it, every rung, from the bottom. I think I said it with too much in my voice, too hard for the small thing it was, because I watched her quietly register that something had happened to me today without asking me what. She just smiled again and handed me my card, the lowest one there is. Then she told me that if I ever had a question, any question at all, I should ask the staff. That was what they were there for. It was such a small thing to say to a stranger. After the church and the parlor and the empty street, it landed harder than she could possibly have known, and I had to look down at the card in my hand so she would not catch my face doing something I would have been embarrassed about. I walked out of the guild an adventurer, the worst ranked one in the city, probably the worst in the country, maybe the worst in anything anyone had bothered to write down. I had no home, no family, and a skill an entire church had laughed at in chorus. But I had a card. I had a promise I had made to no one but myself, in an empty street with nobody to hold me to it but me. And in the back of my mind, quiet as ever and twice as stubborn, that one line on the board kept glowing where it had no business glowing at all. I was going to find out what it did, whatever it took, however long it took. I was going to find out. Anyway, that is where it started. For 3 months, the adventurer's life I had pictured turned out to be other people's dogs. I walked them. I minded their children. I cleaned ditches and hauled crates and swept the back rooms of shops that would not have let me through the front. It was the only work the guild would hand a skillless G rank, and I took all of it because copper was copper and I had nowhere better to be. Real adventurers came back through those doors with monster trophies and loud stories. I came back with a leash and a sore back and a little purse that grew so slowly I could have counted it by candlelight. 3 months, and I had gone exactly nowhere. If I am honest, some of that was fear. A G rank who picks a fight with a monster is a G rank who dies, and everyone had been very clear that I was a G rank. It is easy to mistake other people's certainty for your own caution, but certainty had already cost me a family and a name, and I had started to wonder what else I was letting it take just by agreeing with it. A man can only walk so many dogs before he has to ask whether he is an adventurer or just a boy the guild keeps out of the way. So that morning, I stood at the counter and told Claire I wanted something with teeth in it. She slid a request across the wood instead, a regular client, the eccentric old man named Walter, offering to double the pay if I would just keep walking that enormous dog of his a while longer. He swears you're the only one the animal doesn't try to eat, she said, and there was real warmth in it. Double pay, Kai. That doesn't come along often. You're sure? I was sure. I told her I was going goblin hunting. That stopped her for a second. Then something like respect moved across her face, and she reached under the counter for a different slip. The terms were simple enough. 5 goblins a day, bring back the magic stones, and any extra ones the guild would buy off me by the piece. She walked me through it twice, the way you do with someone you have decided to look out for, and stamped it. I took the paper and went to get ready. At the edge of the city, where no one was looking, I opened my status board, and I read it the way you read a letter you have already memorized. Ordinary numbers, every one of them sitting near the middle, except my luck, which had been scraped down somewhere near the floor. And under my skills, 2 entries. One was the status board itself. The other was the thing that had ruined my life at the ceremony, sitting there quiet and useless. Skill duplication. Nobody could tell me what it did, so I was going to ask the only thing that ever gave me a straight answer. I was going to go kill something and watch what happened to me when I did. The guild rented me a sword and a leather chest guard for a few copper a day, and I carried both into a forest that felt wrong in a way I could not name. It should have been easy. Everyone says where there is 1 goblin, you should brace for 30, but low luck has a way of emptying a room, and for half an hour, the trees gave me nothing but the sound of my own boots and the feeling of being watched by something that never showed itself. Then I found 3 of them. I had a stone in my hand before I had finished deciding to throw it. The first goblin dropped where it stood. The second was already charging when the next stone caught it across the temple and turned the charge into a stagger, and the rented iron did the rest. The third swung its club at the space where my head had been. It did not get a second swing, 3 down, 2 more to make the day pay. None of it took long, and I did not linger over any of it. What I lingered over was the feeling, or the lack of one. I kept waiting to feel different, to feel the skill do whatever a skill was supposed to do. Nothing announced itself, so I wiped the blade, pressed deeper into that wrong feeling wood, and kept hunting until the light started to go. 8 hours and 21 magic stones later, I sat on the edge of a borrowed bed with a hot meal in my stomach for the first time in weeks, and I opened the board to see what the day had bought me. For a moment, I thought it was broken. My strength had climbed far past where one level should have been able to push it. Not a little past, absurdly past, the kind of jump that does not happen, that the guild instructors would have called a lie. And under my skills, where there had been almost nothing that morning, the list had multiplied. Throwing, over and over. One-handed sword basics, over and over. Body strengthening, stacked more than a dozen deep, each copy quietly adding its bonus on top of the last. Everyone learns the rule as a child. You cannot hold the same skill twice. Same type skills never stack. The higher rank simply swallows the lower, and that is that. It is one of the first laws they teach you about how a person grows. Original skills are the one exception to that law, and mine, the joke, the worthless one, the single letter that emptied a church into laughter. Mine was that exception, wearing its plainest possible name, skill duplication. It let me hold the same skill again and again and again, and keep every scrap of every copy. I sat with that in the candlelight longer than I want to admit. The thing they had thrown me away for was a door, and it had been standing open the entire time, and not one of the people who laughed had bothered to look through it. Not the priest who could not finish my rank without a smirk. Not the adventurers who told me I had set a record for worthlessness. Not my own mother and father, who had done the arithmetic on me in an afternoon and decided the sum was 0. They had all read the same single letter and stopped reading. I was the only one who turned the page. I wanted, very badly, to feel triumphant about that. I made myself not. Triumph is loud, and loud is how you get noticed. And I had just understood that the most valuable thing I owned was that nobody believed I owned anything at all. So I folded the feeling down small and put it where I kept everything else I could not afford to show. Tomorrow, I would test it properly. Tonight, I would simply sit with the quiet, enormous fact of it. The next thought arrived cold and clear, and a great deal more dangerous than the first. If it stacks like this from goblins, how far does it go? I went straight back to the guild, late as it was, and asked Claire if they had anything I could read about skills. She raised an eyebrow at the hour, then fetched a compendium so thick I had to carry it with both arms. It only goes up to C rank, she warned, setting it down. The B rank books cost more than this whole haul. A rank, the nobles keep for themselves. And S rank, she made a small wave, half a joke. Those are barely more than rumor, locked away in treasuries, if they exist at all. I read until the candle burned low. Every low skill, every effect, every condition for earning it. And one entry stayed with me long after I closed the cover. Body strengthening lifted every stat at once, and the only thing you had to do to earn another copy was kill something. Of everything in that book, it was the most efficient thing a person could possibly stack. I already held more copies of it than I could count on both hands. What the book did not contain bothered me more than what it did. The powerful skills were hoarded by the same kind of family that had measured a boy and thrown him out for coming up short. For everyone else in the world, that ceiling was real. A wall you were born beneath and died beneath. For me, it was just a list of things I had not gotten around to copying yet. I closed the cover gently because it felt rude to grin at a book. I returned the book, thanked her, and made myself go to bed instead of going back to the forest at midnight like a man possessed. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I would find out where the ceiling was. I would spend a long time looking for that ceiling. I never did find it. I woke 2 hours before dawn and built myself a method. A stone to open, that banked the throwing. The sword to finish, that banked the one-handed sword basics. And the kill itself banked the body strengthening. 3 skills off a single goblin, every time, clean and repeatable. I was not hunting anymore so much as farming, and the field never ran dry. I ran the method 34 times that day. By the end of it, I had stopped checking the board after every kill because the numbers had gone from thrilling to faintly unreal, climbing into territory that simply should not exist for someone the guild still listed at the bottom of the bottom. My hands did the work on their own, while the rest of me did arithmetic. If a day of goblins could do this, then a week could do more. And a month. I made myself stop the thought there. Hope, I had learned, was a thing you rationed. What I let myself notice instead was smaller and stranger. My body had begun to feel borrowed, like a tool sharpened past the point where my hands remembered how to hold it. A stone left my fingers faster than I meant it to. A swing landed harder than I aimed. Somewhere in all those stacked copies, the boy who had flinched through 3 months of errands was being quietly overwritten by something steadier, and the only one who would ever know was me. I was 3 steps inside the guild, still dusty from the forest, when someone walked straight into my shoulder on purpose. He was tall and blonde, and built like a man who had never once had to walk a dog for a living, and it took him only a moment to place my face. I could see the recognition land, the ceremony, the laughter, the single worthless letter, Derek. He said his piece loud enough for the room, and the gist of it was that creatures with no skill had no business pretending to be adventurers, that I should crawl back home to my mother, that the floor was where things like me belonged. Then he put me there with a shove and a glob of spit, and walked off pleased with himself. The room reacted the way rooms always did. Some of them laughed, some of them sneered, most of them simply did not care enough to look up from their drinks. I stayed down a half-second longer than I needed to. It would have taken me less than that half-second to put him through the far wall. I knew it the way I knew my own name now, knew exactly how little of what I had it would cost, and that precisely was the reason I did nothing. The moment they saw what I was, I stopped being free. I became a thing to be used, or owned, or feared, and I had been a thing to other people my whole life. Being underestimated was the one piece of armor no one could take off me, because no one knew I was wearing it. The spit was the easy part to forgive, honestly. It dries. What sat heavier was the room, the laughing, the sneering, and worst of all, the ones who simply did not look up, for whom a G-rank boy on the floor was not even worth the cost of a glance. I memorized that indifference the way I had memorized the priest's smirk, not to nurse it, to spend it later, on the day I had decided was coming. So I got up, wiped my face, and filed it away with all the others. The pile was getting tall. Someday it would come due, all at once, and I intended to be standing somewhere they could not look away from when it did. I went to the counter and reported my quests. Claire ran the paperwork, paused, and then she smiled at me like she had been waiting all day to. "There's no need to rush so hard, you know," she said gently. "The quests won't run away from you." Then she slid a new card across the wood. It was red, E rank. The gap between what they saw and what I was becoming had just gotten a little wider. I pocketed the card and said nothing about it, which by then was its own kind of habit. A month went by, the way the good ones do, which is to say it went by in a blur of the same thing done well. Dawn to dusk, every day, until I was felling something near 50 goblins between sunup and supper, and my stats had quietly stopped resembling anything a guild card should be able to hold. To the rest of the world, I was a diligent E-rank boy, with more grit than sense. Underneath, I was building something none of them had a word for yet. Claire told me one evening that I would reach D rank within days, and then, leaning on the counter, she walked me through what the ranks even meant. E and below were the lower tier, she said. D and up were the middle. B and above, the upper. And at the very top, there aren't any S ranks right now, she said. Not one living soul. To make S rank, you have to put down a demon lord, or something its equal, and no demon lord has risen in 400 years. She said it like a closed door, a number so old it had stopped being a real possibility and become a kind of bedtime fact. Then her voice dropped, the way a voice does when the news is too big for the room. Word had come over the border, from the neighboring kingdom of Marland. A girl there, Elena, they were calling her, had just awakened the rarest original skill there was, the hero. I did not understand then Why that single word turned the air cold. Claire explained it in a hush, half thrilled and half afraid. A hero only ever awakens for one reason. A hero awakens because something is coming to meet it. In 400 years, no hero had been needed because no demon lord had walked the world to need one. One had just been needed. It should not have meant anything to me. Marland was another kingdom. The hero was a stranger, and a demon lord 400 years overdue was somebody else's prophecy. I was an E-rank boy who killed goblins for silver. None of it was mine, but I had spent my whole life being told what I was, and I had just learned how wrong that kind of telling could be. If the world could be wrong about me, it could be wrong about its 400 years of quiet too. Peace is only peace until the thing it was waiting for finally arrives. I went back to my inn that night and I kept grinding, the way I always did. But for the first time, while I counted goblins in the dark, some quiet part of me had started counting something much larger, somewhere off past the edge of everything I could see. The guild hall smelled like spilled ale and wet iron, the way it always did before noon. I set my stones on the counter and waited to be called a liar, because that was usually the part that came next. This time, it didn't. Claire counted the hall, checked it twice, and looked up at me with something close to pride. "You've climbed into the mid-ranks," she said. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? A handful of people manage it in a year. Most never do." I told her I hadn't really noticed. That was a lie. I noticed everything. I noticed that the two seasoned fighters near the board had stopped laughing the moment they saw my card, and that the laugh had curdled into something more careful. Careful was new. Careful I could work with. "You should buy your own gear," she went on, sliding my pay across the wood. "You've got the coin now. Borrowed guild equipment is fine for errand work. It is not fine for what you're walking into." What I was walking into. She didn't know the half of it, and I wasn't about to tell her. On paper, I was a boy who had gotten lucky with goblins. Underneath the paper, I was something I didn't have a word for yet. Something that grew a little every time I did the same small thing twice. But the paper still mattered. The paper was the disguise, and a disguise with steel under it lasts longer than one without. I said I'd think about it, and I meant it. Then I left before the careful looks could turn into questions. The street was loud and bright and full of people who had somewhere to be. I was halfway to the Smith's Row when the crowd parted for a stretcher. There were 4 of them, 3 on their feet barely, holding up the 4th, who wasn't on anything. Their armor was good, real plate, the kind a party pools its money to buy, and it had not helped. One of them caught me looking and didn't have the strength to glare. He just looked back, hollow, like a man trying to remember why he'd ever thought the work was worth it. People stepped aside and then closed up again behind them, the way water does. By the time they reached the guild doors, the street had already forgotten them. I hadn't. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, doing the arithmetic I always did. They were stronger than me on paper. They had numbers, they had plate, they had years, and something out past the walls had folded them up like wet parchment and sent them home to be carried. The gap between what I thought I was and what was actually out there had a number, and the number was wide. I went to buy something to put between me and it. The smith was young, thin, and far too cheerful for a man surrounded by things designed to kill. He asked what I was after. A full set, I told him, within a budget I could actually carry out the door. He thought about it, then went into the back and came out lugging something under a gray sheet of dust. Steel armor, a breastplate and guards, and with it a shield. And the shield was enchanted. I could feel it the way you feel a held breath in a room. He set the lot on the bench, threw in a fistful of healing potions, and named a price. I didn't answer right away. I was busy doing the math, and the math was wrong. The shield alone, with worked magic ore in it, should have cost more than the whole pile he was asking for. The armor on top of that, the potions on top of that. He was selling me a set worth a small house for barely a third of its weight in coin. "That's too cheap," I said. "Why?" The cheer went out of him like a snuffed candle. He looked at the gear, then at me, then at the floor. "They're accident weapons," he admitted, and the 2 words sat in the smoke between us, like something he'd been carrying too long. He told me the rest in a low voice, the way you tell a ghost story you half believe. The set had belonged to a noble. The noble had died wearing it, and ever since the story went, bad luck had trailed the pieces from owner to owner, so no one in town would touch them, and they'd sat in his back room gathering dust and dragging down his shelf space. I am not a man who believes in luck. I'd had the worst luck stat in the building since the day I was born, and the only thing it had ever done to me was make goblins harder to find. A curse is just a story people tell about a thing they don't understand, and a full set of steel and an enchanted shield, at that price, was not a thing I could afford to be superstitious about. I picked the shield up before I answered him. It was heavier than it looked, and under the dull, scratched steel, there was that held breath hum again, work door, waiting for someone to wake it. Whatever had happened to the noble who'd owned it, the metal didn't care. It would guard whoever carried it and feel nothing about the carrier, and that suited me down to the ground. I had spent my whole life being measured by people. It would be a relief to be defended by something that couldn't. "I'll take it," I said. He looked almost disappointed to be rid of his excuse. He wrapped the potions, helped me bundle the rest, and took my coin like a man closing a door he'd wanted closed for a long time. I walked out lighter in the purse and heavier on the shoulder, and it wasn't until I reached the inn that I realized I'd forgotten to buy a sword. I decided it didn't matter. I meant to use whatever came to hand anyway. Every new weapon was a new skill, and every skill was a new room in the house I was quietly building inside myself. A sword could wait. The curse, whatever it was, did not announce itself. That was the thing about loaded guns. They sat very quietly until they didn't. By morning, the careful quiet of the day before was gone, drowned under a crowd. Every adventurer in town seemed to be crammed into the hall, and at the front, an official was shouting to be heard. A demon army was marching on us. 300 strong, he said, monsters of middling and low rank, and the kingdom's hero and her knights were too far away and too green to reach us in time. The hero herself, only a month into her training, barely able to lift the title. The town would have to hold with what it had. The room did the math out loud, and the math comforted them. 300 monsters, none of them especially strong, against a town that could field close to 1,000 adventurers, most of them seasoned. They liked those odds. There was a bounty attached to the defense, and the bounty made the odds look even better. I did not like those odds, and I couldn't have said why without explaining things I had no intention of explaining. A demon army that showed up a month after a hero was born, 300 strong and moving in formation, was not a wandering pack that had stumbled toward the lights of a town. Something had pointed it here. Numbers were the wrong thing to be counting, but a room full of people who have already decided they've won does not want the boy with the worst aptitude in the kingdom telling them what to be afraid of. I started to volunteer. I got as far as opening my mouth. That was when Garrick found me. I'd never had much to do with the man. He was guild staff, the kind who treats a rank card as the whole measure of a person. But he saw me, saw the chance, and took it the way a small man takes any chance to look large in front of a crowd. He talked over me. He called me garbage to my face and to everyone else's. He listed my old errands like a charge sheet, the dog walking, the ditches, the babysitting, and he told me, loudly, to go crawl back into the mud where a scrap of aptitude like me belonged and to keep my face out of a war. I have been told I am worthless in a lot of rooms. My own parents managed it in fewer words. So I stood there and let it run, because the truth was, hitting Garrick would have felt wonderful for exactly as long as it took for the whole room to decide the trash had finally shown its teeth. The disguise was worth more than the satisfaction. Barely, but it was. Then a voice cut across him, sharp as a dropped blade. "What do you think you're doing?" Claire had come around the counter, and she was not careful now, not warm, just furious. She planted herself between us and rounded on him. "Did no one ever teach you not to measure a person by their skill?" Garrick's face went through several colors. The crowd, which a moment ago had been happy to watch a boy get kicked, suddenly found the floor very interesting. Cornered, he muttered an apology, a thin, grudging, lying thing, and aimed a glare at me the whole time, as if the scene were something I had done to him. I accepted it, not because I believed it, not because I forgave him, but because Claire had spent something to defend me, and I wasn't going to waste it by making her stand there longer. I told him it was fine. It wasn't. I filed it, the way I filed everything, on the long, quiet list of things this town would one day be surprised to be reminded of. Then, I held to what I'd come to say, even if I never got to say it out loud. I was going to fight, not for Garrick, not for the bounty, not even, really, for them. For the simple reason that standing aside while it burned would have been its own kind of agreeing with him. In the end, I didn't march with them. Part of it was pride. I could not stomach taking orders from the man who just called me garbage in front of the whole hall. And part of it was honest. I wasn't strong enough yet to matter in a line, and throwing my body into a crush of strangers would only have added one more name to a list. So I went out alone, found a rise with a clear view, and watched. 500 of them marched out, certain of it. You could see the certainty in how they walked. They had numbers, and numbers had always been enough. Their plan was simple to the point of crude. The casters and throwers would open with a surprise volley, and the melee fighters would charge in behind it. It would have worked, maybe, for people who had drilled it. These people hadn't. They were adventurers, not soldiers. They had spent their lives fighting in 2s and 3s against goblins and wolves, and not one of them had ever stood in a formation that large or trusted the man at his shoulder to aim past him instead of through him. The volley went up. the charge went in, and somewhere in the middle of it, a stray paralysis spell, their own, flung from their own backline, caught a frontline fighter square and froze him stiff in the open. He couldn't lift his blade. One of the weaker monsters reached him before anyone else could, and he didn't get up. That was all it took. One man down to friendly fire, and the nerve went out of the whole line like water out of a cracked jar. Some froze, some ran. The charge dissolved into a knot of people trying to be anywhere else, and the casters in the back, watching their own front collapse, panicked and lost the thread of their own spells. After that, it wasn't a battle. It was just noise and dust, and people fleeing back toward a wall that suddenly looked very far away. I had thought, watching them form up, that I might see something worth learning. I was right, only not the way I'd hoped. I learned what a line looks like in the half second before it stops being a line. I learned that panic moves faster than any monster, that it jumps from one person to the next without ever touching the ground, and that the bravest thing most people manage in a rout is to drop what they're carrying so they can run lighter. None of them were cowards. They were brave in the only way anyone had ever taught them, in 2s and 3s, back to back with someone they trusted. Asked to be 1,000 bodies moving as one, they had no idea how, and no one had ever made them learn it. I stood on the rise with the cold wind pulling at me and felt no satisfaction in being right, just the lesson, landing hard and clean. Numbers don't win a fight this size. Coordination does. 1,000 brave fools who have never moved as one body will lose to 300 things that simply keep coming. I turned that over until I had it memorized. One day it would be my turn to be the one who did it right. When it was, I did not intend to learn this on the day it counted. They came back 2 days later, what was left of them. I won't dwell on how they looked, wrapped, limping, hollow-eyed, leaning on each other in the doorway of a hall that had sent them out cheering. More than 100 didn't come back at all. Half the close combat fighters were simply gone, the rest were carried. The monsters had pulled back of their own accord, barely thinned, as if the whole disaster had cost them nothing worth counting. I said I wouldn't dwell on it, and I won't, because the truth of it never lived in any tally. It lived in the way a man cradled his own wrapped arm like it belonged to someone else. It lived in the way nobody in the hall would meet anyone's eyes. It lived in the empty space at a table where a party of 4 had walked out 3 days ago and a party of 1 had walked back. The room had cheered them through these doors with a bounty on their lips. Now it just made space for them and looked away. The survivors turned their grief into fury, and they aimed it at the guild. They had been promised that careful fighting would bring an easy win. There had been nothing easy and nothing won. The enemy was supposed to be no worse than C rank, and yet C rank adventurers, real ones, seasoned ones, had died out there in the dust. And Garrick, who had stood at the front of the planning, whose name was on the operation, did not look at the wounded at all. I watched him fixate on the one thing that mattered to him. He muttered to no one and to everyone that this was a catastrophe, that the whole thing was on record as his, that now he was the one who'd take the fall and lose his post over it. Not one word for the dead, just the arithmetic of his own standing. The other staff said nothing, but they couldn't hide it. I could read the guilt sitting on them like a weight. They knew how lightly they'd treated the threat. They knew where the careful fighting had actually led. Word went around that the guild would send to the capital for a night order. The knights would come. The knights would also take a month, and the town did not have a month. It had whatever was left standing in this room, and a demon army that had just learned it could win. I stood at the edge of all of it, apart, and made the only decision that was mine to make. I had been telling myself for weeks that goblins were enough, that I'd keep my head down and grind quietly in the safe, shallow end of the work. That was over. The town was going to fall while it waited for help that wouldn't arrive in time, and I was the one person in it who could hunt the things in this army and walk back out alive. It was a strange feeling to stand in a room full of people who despised me and find myself responsible for them anyway. Garrick would have laughed. He'd called me garbage that could do nothing but crawl in the mud, and here the garbage was, quietly deciding to do the one thing not one of them could. I didn't need them to know it. That was almost the point. Let the rumors stay exactly what it was. The work would get done either way, and the work had never once cared what rank was printed on my card. So I stopped picking on goblins. A demon was C rank. A demon was the thing that had just folded 100 people into the ground. And a demon, I was fairly sure, was something I could kill. I left the grieving hall without telling anyone where I was going. That part, at least, felt familiar. Demons paid 5 times what a goblin did, and that was the only reason I went looking for them. The trick was the sun. At night, A demon's strength sat somewhere above 4,000, close enough to a B rank that grown adventurers died trying. But daylight cut that to a fifth. By noon, in the open, the thing that could gut a veteran after dark was barely more than a tired animal that hated the light. Most of the town's fighters were out chasing the demon army anyway. The cemetery was mine. I found the first one near the back wall, dragging its claws across a headstone like it had a grudge against the dead. I didn't draw the shield. I bent down, picked up a loose stone the size of a plum, and threw it, just to farm a little experience on my throwing, nothing more. Demons shrug off anything physical. Everyone knew that. The stone went through it like the thing was made of wet paper. It folded over and dissolved, and a magic stone dropped into the grass where it had stood. I crouched there a moment, the next rock still in my hand, and made myself look at the truth I kept not looking at. A thing that shrugged off swords had just come apart from a rock I'd thrown underhand. Level 12, a strength score in the tens of thousands, sitting at the top of a status board like a typo nobody had caught. Skill ranks that didn't belong on anyone, let alone a boy the world had stamped with the lowest letter there was. And no titles. Nothing the system wanted to call me, as if even it hadn't decided what I was yet. Other adventurers chased titles their whole careers. I had numbers that should have come with a parade and a name I couldn't say out loud, and the two facts refused to sit in the same head at once. So I'd stopped trying to make them. Understanding it was a luxury. Using it paid rent, so I used it. For 6 hours, I walked that cemetery and the ruins past it and threw stones until my arm should have ached and didn't. Every demon was 1 silver. Every silver was rent and bread, and another day of not crawling back to anyone. I was tired enough to quit when the 7th hour hit me from behind. Something slammed into my back, hard enough to lift me off my heels. The new armor took most of it. That was the one good thing the cursed set had done me so far, but I still hit a gravestone shoulder first and tasted iron. I threw a stone on instinct. It connected. The thing recovered before I could blink and answered with a spell that wrapped my left leg in a sheet of ice up to the knee. I couldn't run. That was the part that turned my stomach cold. Not the pain, the trapped. I have spent my whole life being able to walk away from rooms that didn't want me, and a sheet of ice around one leg took that away in a heartbeat and left only the fight. I threw my sword at it, the whole blade. The way you throw the last thing you have when keeping it makes no difference. And it caught the creature mid-lunge and bought me a breath. Then it was simply gone. No stone dropped. Not dead then. Just somewhere I couldn't see, which was worse. The danger came at my back again. I ducked, and a dark crescent of magic took the top off the gravestone instead of my head. When it reappeared in front of me, plainly furious, I finally placed it. An archdemon, B rank, a teleporter, and teleporters, I'd learned a long time ago, are slaves to their own rhythm. It blinked behind me and struck. I stayed up. It blinked behind me and struck again, and I stayed up. And somewhere in the middle of taking those hits, the fear went quiet, and the cold part of me took the wheel. I stopped counting blows. I started counting the gap between them. Every single time it tore through space to reach my back, it landed stunned and stiff for the same 2 heartbeats before it could move again. A tax the skill charge that it couldn't choose and not to pay. Always my back. Always 2. Powerful things lean on patterns the same as weak ones. They just get away with it longer because nobody lives long enough to watch. So the next time the air tore open behind me, I didn't turn to look. I counted 1, I counted 2, and I swung blind into the place it had to be. The blow went home. The archdemon shuddered, came apart, and left its magic stone steaming in the frost. I stood there breathing in the cold, legs still half frozen, and said the only thing worth saying out loud. This job was not worth what they paid for it. The man at the counter wasn't Claire. That was the whole problem in one sentence. I set the archdemon's stone down and told him the truth, because the truth was all I had. A B-rank demon had come down on me in the cemetery, and I'd put it down. He looked at the stone. He looked at me, the boy with the worst rank on record. Then he laughed in my face. He called it a lie before I finished the sentence. Said there was no chance someone like me had killed an archdemon, that I'd obviously bought the stone off somebody, that claiming a kill I hadn't made was a false report. He slid the stone into a drawer like it had always been his. Then he docked my points for the lie on top of it. I could have ended it right there. One throw across the room, one demon-killing stone buried in the wall a finger's width from his ear, and he'd have believed every word for the rest of his short, surprised life. My hand was already in my pocket. The rock was already warm from my fingers. It would have felt good. That was the honest, ugly part. It would have felt like an entire year of being called a liar coming out of me at once. I left the rock in my pocket. Showing them what I was, here, over one stone and one lazy man, would buy me a single afternoon of being right and a lifetime of being watched. The whole value of being underestimated is that nobody guards against you. I wasn't going to trade that for the cheap pleasure of a clerk's face going white. So I stood there and did nothing, which was the hardest thing I did all day, and the only smart one. There are 3 ways a monster gets into the world. It grows out of the land and the loose mana in it. It breeds, or something far above me reaches down and makes it. An archdemon turning up where no archdemon should be was exactly the kind of thing a guild with a working brain investigates instead of pocketing. I knew that. He didn't care to. I took my gutted reward, said nothing, and walked out certain that a man that lazy would cost the guild far more than a stone someday. I made it half the way to the inn before I saw them coming the other way, and there was no side street to take. My father, my mother, the 2 people who had decided on the morning of my 12th birthday that the letter the priest read out had made me a bad investment and had thrown me into the street the same week. They looked at me the way you look at a stain you thought the rain had washed off. The words were the kind you'd expect. Why was the skillless trash still hanging around? How strange that I wasn't dead in a ditch yet. They'd have bet money on it. My mother said it the way she used to comment on the weather, mild and certain, a small true thing about the world. My father didn't bother with words at all. He just looked at me the length of a breath, the way you'd check a sum you already knew the answer to, and then looked past me, as if the looking had cost him something he resented spending. I had rehearsed 100 answers to them over 100 cold nights. Standing there, I used none of them. None of them would have landed the way I needed it to land, which was not in a street at dusk, with my reward already stolen, and ice still melting out of my boot. The answer I wanted them to hear was years away yet, and it wasn't words. I kept my face flat. I didn't give them a flinch, because a flinch was the only payment they were after, and I'd be damned before I handed it over. But I filed every word away, neat and dated, the way I filed everything I meant to collect on later. And here was the thing they didn't know, the thing that had started turning in the dark corners of that town like a coin nobody could quite read. Word was getting around. Out near the forest, somebody was thinning the monsters that should have been overrunning the roads, and the name attached to the rumor was the skillless reject the guild had written off. I heard later how that rumor landed in houses like the one I'd been thrown out of, and at counters like the one that had just robbed me. They laughed it off. Someone had the names mixed up, surely. That boy could never. It was almost funny, listening to people set themselves up to be wrong with that much confidence. Almost. After the archdemon thrashed me, I had the sense to stop hunting things that could kill me and go back to goblins. Not for the coin this time, for the magic. The shield I'd been sold cheap carried a holy enchantment. Pour mana into it, and it spat out a ray of clean light. No piercing weight to it, but enough to stagger a thing and put it down, and more to the point, enough to teach my body what casting felt like. Kill goblins with it long enough, and the system would hand me Magic Novice, then Magic Basics, the way it handed me everything else, by sheer stubborn repetition. Each shot cost me 50 mana, give or take. 20 shots, and I was empty. So I capped myself at 20 kills a day and called it work. It went fine for about a month. Then it stopped going fine, because there were no goblins. Where I'd normally flush 50 out of the brush in a morning, I found 5, then 3. The forest had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with me. Goblins breed like nothing else alive and die inside 3 short years, and they leave bodies where most monsters leave only a stone. So a collapse like this meant something had moved into their range and either eaten them out or scared them off. Something big enough to empty a forest. I stood in the silence with the shield cooling on my arm and thought, of course it would be the thing nobody wanted to look at. Claire took it seriously, which was the only reason I bothered reporting it at all. I told her the goblin count had cratered, 5, where there should be 50, and that an empty forest usually meant a full one somewhere nearby. She didn't wave it off. She wrote it down, frowned at her own handwriting, and told me she'd look into it. The numbers really have dropped that far, she said, half to me and half to the counter. Understood, I'll find someone. She didn't get the chance. The guildmaster came through the back like weather. Big man, loud, the kind who fills a doorway on purpose. He'd heard enough to decide it was nothing. A few missing goblins, and I wanted him to spare investigators. They were stretched to the bone hunting the demon lord's army that had walked off the map. The only reason this one, me, couldn't find goblins, he said, was that my scouting was useless, on account of my not having any real skills to scout with. Claire started to push back and he rolled right over her. I watched her go quiet under it, the way you go quiet when the man signing your wages tells you to. Bram, his name was. I tucked it next to the others. I didn't argue. Arguing in that room was a fight I couldn't win and didn't need to. I just told Claire it wasn't her fault, because it wasn't, and because she looked like she needed to hear it from somebody. Then I went back to the inn with a bad feeling and worse luck, turning over the same useless question. What was I supposed to grind now, with the woods gone empty? I already knew the answer, I just didn't like it. The sound reached me from deep in the trees a few days later. Too many feet, too much breathing, in a part of the woods that should have been dead silent. Every sensible part of me said, go home. I went in anyway, low and slow, until the trees opened onto something my brain refused to add up for a second. Monsters. A field of them, resting in the gloom. A core of D-rank brutes with the smaller things crowded around them the way smaller things always defer to bigger ones. The missing army. Not all of it, maybe, but a piece of it, bedded down in the one forest nobody was searching, fat and quiet, while the goblins it had eaten out of house and home stayed gone. That was my vanished population. That was Bram's nothing. I never got to back out. A snake-type thing near the edge had a sense sharper than the rest, and it found me before I'd taken 3 steps in reverse. It struck, and then the whole field was awake and pouring toward me, and the choice to leave was gone. So I worked. I won't pretty it up. There's no clever way to tell it, and no reason to dwell on the ugly parts. The work was just work, the way it had been in the cemetery, the way it had been every gray morning since I'd picked up my first rented sword. Find the thing, end the thing, move to the next thing. Feel nothing about it because feeling something slowed your hands. I threw stones until my arm was a machine that happened to be attached to me. When the stones ran low, I threw the magic stones the dead ones left behind, because in that much strength, a polished bead of crystallized mana hit like a sling bullet from a god. When they closed too near for throwing, the shield came up and lit the gloom white and cleared a path through whatever was standing in it. The dense trees that should have favored them favored me instead. The big ones couldn't swing. The small ones tripped over the big ones, and the whole snarling weight of the thing funneled itself into a space exactly as wide as my arm. Half an hour of it, maybe more, in that green dark, until the field that had been 100 strong was a field of nothing but trampled ferns and cooling stones. I stood in the middle of it, lungs burning, and asked the empty trees if I'd actually done it. Then I answered myself, too loud, the way you do when relief gets out ahead of sense. I won. I actually won. The forest answered, off past the trees I'd come through, a long way off and getting shorter. Something moved, not one something, a lot of them, a low rolling pressure of feet and breath that I felt in the ground before I heard it in the air, and I understood, with my own stupid shout still hanging there for anyone to follow, that I'd had it wrong from the first step. This hadn't been the army. 100 monsters bedded down in a forest is not an army. It's the picket line an army leaves at its edge while the rest of it sleeps deeper in. I'd cleared the front porch and called it the house. The rest were still coming, and I had just stood in the middle of the quiet and told every one of them at the top of my lungs exactly where to find me. My shout was still hanging in the air when the forest answered it. I heard them before I saw them, the wet slap of many feet, the rattle of crude iron, that low chattering that goblins make when there are too many of them to be afraid. The 100 I had cleared had only been the front edge. The rest were coming, and I had just told them exactly where to look. I turned to run. That was the smart move, the only move, and my body knew it before my mind finished the thought. I made it 4 strides. Then an arrow took me through the foot. I went down hard in the leaf litter, the pain white and total, my own weight driving the shaft deeper. A goblin archer somewhere in the dark had loosed on a limping shape and gotten lucky. I rolled onto my back because that was all I could do, and a bull demon was already there, all shoulders and horns, an axe the size of a door lifting over me against the last of the light. I had killed things bigger than it. I had a shield strapped to my arm that could burn a clearing flat. None of that mattered when I could not get my legs under me. I watched the axe reach the top of its arc, and I thought, with a strange flat clarity, that this was a stupid way to die after everything. The blow never landed. A man was standing over me. I had not seen him arrive. There had been empty air, and then there was a back in a dark coat and a thin sword held up at an angle, and the bull demon's axe stopped against that thin blade like it had struck a mountain. He did not even look strained. He glanced down at me over his shoulder, asked if I was still in one piece, and told me to stay where I was. Then he was gone again, and the forest filled with thunder. I cannot describe it as a fight, because a fight has 2 sides. This was something closer to weather. He moved between the monsters faster than I could track, and where he passed there was a crack of white light and a sound like the sky tearing, and the things that had been about to kill me simply stopped being a threat. The smaller ones dropped. The big ones froze mid-step. caught in their own held breath, and did not get up after he had gone by. It took seconds. It took less time than it had taken the arrow to put me on the ground. I had thought I was strong. 3 days ago, I had cleared 100 of these things with stones and a borrowed shield, and called myself careful for it. Watching this man, I understood for the first time what the top of the ladder actually looked like, and how far below it I still stood, even with everything I had been hiding. It was the most useful thing anyone had shown me in months, and he had not meant to teach me anything at all. When it was over, the clearing was quiet, and I was lying in the middle of it, alive, with no real idea why. The pain in my foot came back all at once. Now that there was room for it, I let it. Pain meant there was still a foot, and a me attached to it. Hooves came through the trees a breath later, too late to matter. Half a dozen riders in proper knight's steel reined up at the edge of the clearing and stared at what was already finished. One of them, a lean man with an easy, watchful face and an officer's sash, swung down and took it all in. The scattered horde, the swordsman, me bleeding in the dirt. "We came to help," he said, and then stopped, because there was plainly nothing left to help with. He recovered fast. "I'm Hugo, 6th Night Squad. We rode out the moment your guild's report reached us." It took me a second to understand him through the ringing in my ears. The report, Claire. She had been worried about the forest, and worried about me, and when no one above her would listen, she had gone over their heads and sent for knights. I was alive because a guild clerk had refused to let it go. I asked who the swordsman was. Hugo said the name like it should have meant something to me, and after a moment, it did. Magnus, the one they called the Thunder God, one of the 3 strongest blades in the kingdom, a man whose original skill shared his title. I had been saved by a story people told in taverns. Magnus himself was walking the clearing, not looking at me, looking at the dead, at the ones near the tree line that had gone down before the thunder ever started, the ones with stones buried in them and shield burns across them, the 100 I had put down myself before the second wave turned. He crouched by one, then another, reading the field the way a hunter reads tracks. When he finally looked at me, something behind his eyes had quietly rearranged. He did not say it. He did not have to. He had counted, and the count did not match the boy bleeding in front of him, with an arrow through his foot and a G stamped on his card. I thanked them for saving my life. I meant it. I also kept my mouth shut about the rest, and let the wound and the exhaustion do the talking, because a man like Magnus noticing me was the most dangerous thing that had happened all night. The axe only wanted to kill me. Being seen wanted something worse. I had built my whole small life on being beneath attention. The G-rank boy, the joke, the one nobody bothered to watch. It was the cheapest armor in the world, and it had kept me alive every single day since the ceremony. Magnus had just put a crack in it without lifting his voice, and I lay there in the cold leaves, doing the math on how much that crack was going to cost me, and whether there was any way left to close it. There was not. You cannot unring a bell that a thunder god has heard. They brought me back to the guild on a knight's horse, and for the first time in half a year, the hall went quiet when I walked in. It was not respect, not yet. It was confusion. The knights of the 6th had ridden in with the trash boy, and Hugo was telling anyone who would listen that this young adventurer had cut down something like 100 of the demon lord's army on his own before the rest fell on him. I tried to wave it off. Weak monsters, a lucky matchup. Nothing 100 of them couldn't have done. Hugo looked at me like he knew exactly what I was doing and decided, for now, to let me do it. Then Bram came down the stairs. I will not give the guild master's words room to breathe, because they were not worth the air the first time. He called me useless in front of the whole hall. He called me a burden who had dragged the knights out here and embarrassed the branch. He said I would answer for the trouble I had caused, and somewhere in the middle of all that bluster, without quite meaning to, he admitted he would have been just as happy if the forest had kept me. The hall heard it. Hugo heard it. What happened next, I did not have to do anything for. I just stood there and watched it land. Hugo stepped forward, and the easy warmth was gone from his voice. He did not shout. He listed. The guild had a standing rule to save a life that could be saved, and Bram, it turned out, did not even know his own rule. There had been a warning about the forest, reported properly, and Bram had buried it. There had been an order not to throw adventurers at the demon lord's army, and Bram had thrown them anyway. That was where the 100 dead from the failed defense had come from, the ones whose names the hall still remembered. There was money missing from the branch's books. There were the kills he had let his clerks confiscate from me and the rank he had let them dock. There were his own people, underpaid and bullied into silence, point by point, in a flat, clear voice, in front of everyone Bram had ever lorded over. I watched the man shrink. He had spent every one of my visits looking at me like something scraped off a boot, and now the same hall that had laughed along with him was watching him with that careful, hungry, quiet people get when they realize a powerful man is about to stop being powerful. A few of the adventurers near the back had the decency to look at the floor. Most of them just watched. I knew that feeling from the other side of it, being the thing a room agreed to look down on. I had not expected to enjoy seeing it land on someone else quite this much. I had spent months being made small in this hall, and I stood there and watched it happen to him instead. And I will be honest, it was the cleanest thing I had felt in a long time. Not loud, not triumphant, just a knot somewhere in my chest. One I had carried so long I had stopped noticing it, loosening by a single turn. Bram did the only thing men like him have left. He swung. He came at the knights with his fist, and Magnus put him on the floor before the blow was halfway there. One motion, no flourish. The guildmaster folded and did not get up, and two of the sixth picked him up by the arms and carried him out of his own hall, while the room watched in dead silence. It should have felt bigger than it did. A man who had stolen from me and left me to die was being dragged out the door, and what I mostly felt was a strange, tired amazement that it had taken this much, a thunder god and a forest full of corpses, just to crack open one lie about who I was. One lie, the guild's lie. My parents were not in that hall. They had not heard a word of it. The debt that actually mattered to me was still sitting exactly where it had always sat, untouched. 2 streets away in a house that had thrown me out. But it was a start. I let myself have that much. Hugo came to find me 3 days later and let himself in like we were already friends. The news he brought was better than I had let myself hope for. Bram was finished, dismissed, the misconduct too long a list to bury. They had retested the staff he had packed the branch with, and something close to half of them had washed out. Clerks who had never earned the badges they wore. The ranks he had rigged were going to be looked at, every unfair deduction flagged to be undone, mine among them. Between the army I had thinned and the months of points stolen back, my card was finally going to climb towards C rank. I sat with that for a moment, a rank I had earned half a year ago, handed back to me only because a guildmaster finally got caught. That was the part that stuck in my throat, not gratitude, arithmetic. None of what I had actually done had moved the number. The number had moved because a man with a sash had walked into the right room. I filed that away with everything else I knew about how worth got decided in this kingdom, and how little of the deciding ever happened in the hands of the person being weighed. Still, C rank. The receptionist who had docked me would have to stamp it themselves. There was a small, petty pleasure in that I did not bother to talk myself out of. Hugo watched me take it in. Then, lightly, like it was nothing, he asked whether I had really brought down an archdemon out there, because that was B rank work, and B rank work did not belong to a boy who looked like me. I told him it was a lucky matchup. I told him I was no B rank. He smiled and did not believe a word of it, and had the grace not to push. He proposed a spar, just the two of us, friendly, no stakes. I said no. I had nothing to gain from it and a great deal to lose. The moment I showed a man tied to the crown what I could actually do, I stopped being a boy nobody wanted and started being a tool somebody owned. I had watched authority decide what I was worth once already. I was not in a hurry to hand another set of hands the chance. Then Hugo changed the price. Beat him, he said, and he would write me a pass to the royal capital. I accepted before he finished the sentence. The capital was where the academy was, where the path I had been quietly walking toward actually led, and there was no getting through its gates without a toll I could not pay or a pass I could not get, until now. One spar against a man who could cut through steel for the key to everything I wanted. It was worth the risk. I only kept one thought to myself, the way I kept most things. Before I ever crossed blades with someone like Hugo, before I let anyone watch me closely, I wanted my sword work higher. I had strength I had no business having, and a throw that found its mark whether I aimed it or not. But a blade was the one thing I still had to earn the honest way, so I would, quietly, the way I did everything. He left whistling. I sat in the gray light and flexed my healed foot, and thought that the ground had shifted under me twice this week, and that for once, both shifts had moved in my direction. I did not let it go to my head. The people who had thrown me away still did not know my name was worth knowing. That part, I was saving. Hugo had a way of asking questions that sounded like he was doing you a favor by asking them. We were walking the lane toward the guild yard, the spar still half an idea between us, when he asked what had lit a fire under me all of a sudden. For once, I told him the truth. First, I told him the shape of the world because the truth needed it for scaffolding. Every town charges to pass its gates, I said, and the bigger the town, the heavier the toll. A small place takes a few silver. The royal capital takes a full gold coin just to walk through the wall, which is the polite way a kingdom keeps the poor on the outside of it. Only nobles, fat merchants, and families who'd lived there for generations could afford to simply exist in that city. A pass permit waived the fee. To a commoner, a pass was worth more than the gold it saved, because it was permission to be somewhere you weren't born to be. And then I told him why any of that mattered to me. I wanted into Aldrich Academy. I said it plainly, the way you say a thing you've decided not to be embarrassed about anymore. Then I gave him the rest, because he'd earned that much. To climb to the top rank, you had to have a hand in bringing down the Demon Lord, and no one did that alone. It needed the hero's cooperation. It needed a whole kingdom deciding your name was worth saying out loud. The hero was still a child, expected to enroll at the academy in 3 years, and if I was standing there when she arrived, I had a road. A long one, uphill the whole way. But a road which was more than a G-rank boy was ever supposed to get. So that's the shape of it, Hugo said, and rolled his shoulder like a man settling into work. He offered me a deal on the spot, a mock bout, here, today. If I won, the pass to the capital was mine. No gold at the gate, no questions. To keep it fair, he said, he'd fight me with one hand. I should have known better. The ring behind the guild was kept for high-rank adventurers to wear each other out, where no one important had to watch. Hugo tied his right hand behind his back, drew with his left, and told me to come at him. I didn't, so he came at me. His first step closed the distance before I finished reading it. I slipped the pass by a hair, and even the wind off the miss had enough weight in it to tell me a clean hit would have folded me in half. So I stopped trying to win on speed I didn't have. I gave ground. I dropped low, let him commit, watched his weight hang forward over his front foot, and there, in that half second, I caught his blade against mine, turned it off its line, and put my counter exactly where it needed to go. It landed on nothing. He simply wasn't where he had been. One blink, he was leaning into my counter. The next, he was a full stride out of reach, and the bout ended the way a heavy door closes. A single controlled tap with the flat of his blade that sat me down in the dirt. No flourish. He held back. I came to a moment later, sore through the ribs and whole everywhere that mattered. When the world stopped tilting, he told me what had happened. An original skill of his, the kind that triples every number a man has for a short window. Most strong fighters carried something like it, an original combat skill that fed them bonus growth every level, which was exactly why men with one pulled so far ahead of men without. He hadn't needed the trick against me. He'd used it anyway, and that told me more than the loss did. He wasn't measuring me as a threat. He was measuring me as a thing worth being careful around. You could have just handed it over, I said, brushing grit off my palms. For your cute future junior, he laughed. A wager was a wager, he told me, and held out a hand to pull me up instead of a pass. So I'd be paying the gold coin at the Capitol gate out of my own pocket like every other commoner. Fine, I'd pay it. I sat a breath longer, taking stock of my own strange arithmetic the way I always did after a loss. A body that should not have managed half of what it just had. A strength that towered so far over the rest of my numbers, it looked like a clerk's mistake. A luck so low I'd stopped reading the line. I was barely past my 17th year, and I'd made a one-handed knight of the 6th spend a trick to close the distance. And I'd let him believe the trick was what won it. That part I kept, folded small and tucked away where he couldn't see it. A man who knows exactly what you can do can plan around you. A man who only suspects has to keep being careful. I preferred careful. Still, the loss sat with me on the walk back, and not the way a sore rib does. For 3 years, I'd measured myself against goblins and demons and a guild that wanted me gone, and I'd started to forget there were people I simply could not beat yet. Hugo was one of them. The hero, whoever she turned out to be, would be another. So would whatever the demon lord kept above his castle. I decided, quietly, that before I let anyone see the true shape of what skill duplication had made of me, I would raise my plain sword work until it could carry the lie on its own. Power you have to explain is power someone can take from you. I wanted mine to look like practice. 3 mornings later, Claire called me to the counter, slid a card across the wood, and congratulated me on my promotion to C rank. I told her it was too fast. I'd fought low monsters with a forest at my back and a slope under my feet. Magnus had cut down half the horde himself before I'd done anything a rank could be hung on. Normally, the jump from D to C took 5 archdemons, or the equal of it in proven merit, and I had one. I laid all of it out, every reason the promotion didn't add up, because the math of being worth something still felt like it belonged to someone else, and some part of me kept waiting for the clerk behind the counter to call me a liar and take it back. She didn't. She just counted the other side of the ledger, patient, like she'd done it before. One archdemon, down. A solo stand against the army's push when grown parties broke and ran. Years of crooked deductions, finally reversed. The card wasn't a gift, she said. It was the correction. It helped that I trusted the hand giving it. The guild that had cheated me for years wasn't the guild standing in front of me now. The old master gone, his crooked clerks washed out after him. The place still smelled like spilled ale and wet iron, but the people running it had changed, and for once, the correction in my hand had honest fingerprints on it. That mattered more than the rank did. It was also pink. I said so. I held it up with as much dignity as a man can hold a pink card and asked why the C rank had to be that color. And she told me the old story without missing a beat, that long ago, each rank's color was chosen by a different hand. The hero picked one, the king another, the guildmaster, the people, the knight commander, each took a turn, and the queen, when it came to hers, had looked at the C rank and chosen pink. So I had royal taste to thank. I tucked the thing away where I wouldn't have to look at it, underneath the grumbling, quiet enough that I didn't let it reach my face. The thing it actually meant sat down in my chest and made itself at home. The boy a church full of strangers had decided about in a single breath. The boy they'd read one letter off a board for and laughed. That boy was holding a mid-tier rank now, in the same hall where men had built whole afternoons out of mocking him. And the card was real, and no one could take it back. Word like that doesn't stay in one building. It traveled the way I'd have wanted it to, if I were the sort of man who admitted to wanting things. It reached an old crowd of adventurers who'd made sport of me. It reached, in time, a house with brass buttons on the coats and a name they'd been so quick to take back. The skill-less trash, a recognized C rank. I heard later my father called it a clerical error, a fluke that would correct itself by winter. He could keep thinking that. I wasn't going to be the one to explain it to him. When the debt finally came due, I wanted him close enough to watch my face while it did. Claire let me have the moment, then folded the next thing into it so smoothly, I almost missed the seam. An investigation team was forming, she said, for the graveyard, where the archdemon had first surfaced. C rank, or above, only. The first to find the thing was expected to join. I looked at the pink card. I looked at her. I ran the arithmetic again, and this time it added up too neatly. The promotion hadn't only corrected my record, it had cut me a key to a door I'd never asked to walk through, and the door had been standing there the whole time, waiting for the key to be made. You timed this, I said. She smiled the way honest people smile when you've caught them doing something for your own good, and she didn't bother to deny it. I could have walked. I had the rank now. I didn't owe anyone a graveyard full of questions, but the questions were already mine. The archdemon I'd put down where it had no business being. The cheap, cursed gear still strapped to my arm, carrying a curse no one could name. Whatever was wrong out there had my fingerprints on it before I'd agreed to a thing. So I took the quest, wary, leashed, walking in with both eyes open. But I took it. The recognition had come at last. It just came holding a lead. Claire knocked once on the back office door and held it open for me, and I understood that whatever waited inside was the reason she had been gentle with me all week. The man behind the desk had white hair and the kind of stillness that takes years to earn. He told me his name was Roland, that he had been a B-rank adventurer until the capital decided the guild here needed someone who could count, and that he had read every line of my record twice. Then he asked to see my card. I set it on the desk and let it speak for me. The kill it logged was the archdemon from the cemetery, the one a different clerk had once called a lie to my face. He studied it a long moment. An archdemon. Here. He said it the way you'd say a tide had come in uphill. We went through it together. A freak mutation, strong past its rank. A wanderer that had drifted in from somewhere worse, or something made. Roland turned each one over and set it down. A mutant that size would have left a trail of dead long before the cemetery. A wanderer would have been seen crossing open ground. That left the answer nobody likes, and he was honest enough to say it plainly. Made, he said. Someone is making them. The word changed the shape of the room. Scattered monster trouble is weather. A thing that is being grown on purpose has a hand behind it, and a hand has a face, and a face can be found. I felt the floor of the story tilt under me, and I think that was the moment the real question woke up. Not what is happening, but who and why, and how much worse it gets before we know. Roland wasn't going to send anyone into that alone. He had Claire draw up a request for extra hands, and by the time the ink dried, there were 5 of us standing in his office. A lean man with a bow named himself Marcus, C rank, an archer whose skill sharpened his eyes until he could read a tree line at half a mile. A tall woman with a great sword across her back said she was Grace, D rank, and that she hit hard, which I would learn was the most modest thing anyone said all day. A bright woman with a short sword and a satchel bundle of chalk and string was Emily, D rank, and she told us before anyone asked that her real worth was a search skill that found what hid. The last was a sandy-haired mage, Paul, D rank, polite and a little loud, who said it was good to meet us and meant it. Marcus set the formation without being asked, and he did it well. Grace and me on the front, himself and Paul behind, Emily out as scout and rear guard. Emily's chin came up at that. Why am I in the back? My eyes are the whole reason you'd take me. Because your eyes are the whole reason I'd take you. Marcus didn't argue it like a fight. He laid it out like a map. A scout who takes a hit at the front turns a careful retreat into a rout. A backline with no guard gets opened from behind the second things go close and ugly. You're not behind us. You're the door nobody gets through. She thought about it, then nodded, mollified in the particular way of someone who wanted to be told they mattered. I watched Marcus fit 5 strangers into one shape in under a minute and filed it away. Useful and a little dangerous. A man that smooth. He clapped his hands once. Supplies first, then the dark. The market was the last easy thing we'd have for a while, and we all knew it, which is why nobody hurried. We bought light stones for the deep stretches where the cemetery stopped letting the sun in, and Paul bought enough healing potions for a small war. Marcus asked what I usually carried. 5, I said. Maybe. Grace turned. 5 potions for a graveyard? I don't get hit much. Not much, or not at all? She was grinning, but she meant it. I shrugged, which was answer enough, and the look that went around the 4 of them was the look people give a card trick they can't catch. I changed the subject before it could grow legs. Emily tried to steer us toward a stall of dyed coats, declaring it a crime that a recognized adventurer dressed like a hedge. I told her my coin was spoken for, all of it, for gear. She let it drop with a theatrical sigh, but she filed it away as fondly as I'd filed Marcus, and I noticed that too, that she'd already decided to like me. No proof required, which after the last few years was its own small, strange weather. We finished fast. Nobody said the word Roland had said, but it walked with us the whole way to the cemetery gate. You don't make small talk over a thing that grows monsters in the dark. You just keep your hands busy and your jokes light and pretend the quiet is about something else. We set the formation at the gate and went in the way Marcus had drawn it. I took them to the center first, the patch of trampled ground where I'd put down the first archdemon, because if anything about this place was wrong, it would be wrong there. Emily walked it with her search skill open and her string and chalk out, and found nothing she could name. I had Paul read the air. Mages can feel ambient magic the way the rest of us feel a draft, and the number that matters is simple. An archdemon does not get born out of thin air, unless that air is thick with power for a long, long time. He frowned and said it was high. Then, before I could hope, he said it was nowhere near high enough, not by years. So we searched, 4 hours, down to the lowest, oldest part of the cemetery, where the light stones threw our shadows up the walls and the cold got into the seams of my armor. We found graves and damp, and the particular silence of a place that has forgotten the sun. We found nothing that explained a single thing. By the time we turned back, all 5 of us had the same thought, and none of us said it. The wrongness wasn't in the room. It was in the timing. It was somewhere we couldn't point a light at. We met the 2 of them near the gate, where the path bent, and the last light came through the railings in long red bars. 2 demons, ordinary ones, the kind a party like ours clears without breaking stride. Marcus's arrows found the first before it finished turning. Paul's spell lit it. My stone took it through the dark, and it was simply over. One of them gone, no drama in it. The second one glowed. I have no better word. It stood there, and it began to shine from the inside, and the shine pulled it taller and broader and worse, horns curving back where there had been none, and it became an archdemon in front of us with no fight, no kill, no leveling, none of the things that are supposed to come first. Grace swore. Paul said the thing that everyone says when the world breaks a rule, which is just no, that's not how it works. It wasn't how it works. That was the whole point. I didn't have time to be afraid of the meaning yet. I drew the knife I dipped in holy water and put it into the thing, and it screamed in a register that loosened my teeth. Marcus's arrows glanced off the new hide. Emily's short sword skated wide. This was past the 5 of us as 5 of us. Grace, I didn't need more than her name. With you, she brought the great sword up over her shoulder, and I have thought since about how easy it was, how natural. The 2 of us stepping into the same half second without a plan. Her arc came down with everything her rank wasn't supposed to hold, and I came in under it with everything mine hid, and between her weight and whatever I am, we caught the thing at the join of the same instant, and it could not stand against both. The team closed on what was left. It did not get up. We measured the air again, after. Still ordinary. Still nowhere near enough to make what we had just watched it make. Nobody wanted to say it on the walkout, so I'll say it now. the way I understood it then, cold and certain in my chest. Something had reached into that demon and forced it up the ladder, and that something was still loose, and it had done it 10 steps from where we stood. Roland listened to the whole thing without once telling us we were mistaken, which after years of the old guild was its own kind of medicine. When we finished, he sat with it, then said what a careful man says. He'd send a larger team, mixed ranks, and he'd ask the church for a priest with real healing, because if this was holy work gone wrong, then holy power was what would read it. He thanked us and paid us fairly, and not one of the 5 of us argued when the talk turned to who'd take the next graveyard run. We had all, separately and at once, decided we wanted nothing further to do with that place. I told myself the same thing on the way to the door. Not my mystery. I had a rank to climb, and a skill to hide, and an academy 3 years off. Let the priests and the bigger teams chase the hand in the dark. I believed it for about a week. The mixed team and their priests swept the cemetery for a week and turned up nothing. Not a demon, not an archdemon, not a thread. They talked about a second week and then sealing the place off for good. The hand had gone still the moment people started looking for it, which told me more than anything they found. I cleared a goblin job to keep my coin honest, reported it, and went to the church for more holy water, since the knife had proven its worth. The attendant who measured it out was young and quick-eyed, and she stopped mid-pour with her gaze on my arm. "Where did you get that shield?" I told her a blacksmith had sold it cheap. I didn't tell her how cheap or why. "It's cursed." She set the bottle down and came around the counter. "The armor too," she said, both of them carrying a curse old and quiet, the kind that rides a thing for years without announcing itself. I asked where a curse like that comes from. "Off a monster, most often," she said. "They leave one behind when they kill, the way a wound leaves a scar." The blacksmith's words came back to me then, the part I'd shrugged off in a cheaper, stupider mood. The gear had belonged to a noble an archdemon had killed. I kept my voice level. "Could a thing like this make a monster evolve, if you carried it near the same kind it came from?" She didn't even pause. "There were precedents," she said. "Cursed gear brought close to its own kind could feed a monster, push it, ripen it past where it should go. I have been afraid in a lot of ways. This was a new one. I thought of the cemetery, of the demon that glowed and grew with no cause anyone could find, and of the cursed steel I had been wearing the whole time I stood in that ground, the whole time I fought the first archdemon at its center. I did not know if it was me. I knew I would not spend one more day being a thing that might be the answer to the question everyone was hunting. "Take it off," I said. "The curse, not the enchantment. Leave the holy light in the shield. I need that. The curse today. I don't care what it costs." She named a price that should have made me haggle. I paid it without a word and stood there while she worked it loose, strand by strand, until the air around my arm felt like air again. I walked out lighter in the purse and heavier everywhere else. The mystery hadn't been solved. It had only moved out of the cemetery and into my own hands, and out again now that I'd cut it free. Somewhere, a hand was still growing monsters on purpose, patient enough to go quiet the second it was watched. I didn't know its name yet. I was going to. I came to the guild that morning, meaning to take a goblin job, and Claire ambushed me at the counter before I could reach the board. "Please," she said, both hands flat on the wood like she was holding it down, "before you say anything about goblins." I said anything about goblins. She winced and pushed a slip across to me anyway. A dog. Not a hunt, not a sweep, not a cursed graveyard, a walk. The old man's hound again, the one nobody else on the roster would touch, the one she kept calling, with a kind of tired affection, the mad dog. A year ago, I would have argued. I had a list of things I was supposed to be doing, and walking a dog was on none of them. But I had spent the last stretch of my life in cemeteries and ambushes and rooms where men decided whether I got to keep what I had earned, and somewhere in there, I had stopped being able to remember the last quiet thing I did. "Fine," I said. I took the slip. Claire looked at me like I had handed her a month off. "He liked me last time. I don't know what that says about his judgment." Walter met me from his wheelchair, and he was glad in the open, uncomplicated way old people are glad when someone young bothers to come back. His parlor was the same wonderful mess it had always been. Brass half machines on every surface. Things with gears that did nothing I could name. He could not get down on the floor with his dog anymore. He told me Comet had been lonely. He said it lightly, the way you say a thing you have decided not to be sad about. And then he asked after me, as if my answer were the most interesting thing he would hear all week. Comet decided my answer could wait. He had grown. The last time I walked him, he had been big. Now, he was the size of a small barn that had learned to love. A wall of warm fur that crossed the room in 2 strides and put his paws on my shoulders and very nearly took us both into the wall. I got an arm up. I told him to sit before he flattened his only friend with a leash license. He did not sit. He grinned the way only enormous dogs grin, like the whole idea of me was the best news in the world. Walter laughed, soft and rattling, and waved us out the door. A 5-meter hound on a leash does not get walked so much as negotiated with. Comet wanted the school, where children shrieked in the good way and pressed their faces to the fence. He wanted the riverbank, the hill with the long view, the loud streets that smelled of bread and iron. He wanted, as far as I could tell, everything, all of it, at once, and he wanted to share it with me. I let him pull. It was the first afternoon in longer than I wanted to admit that nobody needed me to be dangerous. Word travels in a town like ours, and not all of it stayed in the town. Out past the gate, the people who had cut me loose at 12 were starting to hear that the boy with the joke of a skill had put down an archdemon and earned a real rank. My father laughed it off again. Somebody else's son, surely. It cost me nothing to be laughed at by a man who was not in the room. That was the new part. I walked a giant dog along a bright river and let the rumor do its slow work without me. By the time we climbed the hill, Comet had stopped pulling. He sat against my leg, heavy as a debt I was glad to owe, and we watched the town do its small ordinary business below us, and I did not think about a single thing that could kill me. Months folded over each other the way good months do, and the next one I remember clearly is the lunch with Emily. We were comparing ages, which is the kind of thing you do when you are almost 13 and the person across the table is 14 and unbearably sure of herself about the 1 year. She said it like a rank. I let her have it. Then she let something slip, the way you let slip a thing you have been carrying carefully so it won't break. She wanted to test into Aldrich Academy. She said the name and then watched my face to see what I would do with it. What I did with it was admit the truth. I wanted that too, I said. I just figured I'd be doing it alone. I had been afraid of the alone part more than the test, though I did not say that, and she heard it anyway. Then, we go together. She said it instantly, no gap at all, like the answer had been waiting in her mouth the whole meal. I'll test in for sure if you're going. She had only studied for the practical, she confessed, a little shy about it, not the written, numbers and magic theory, and the parts of chemistry I was also quietly terrible at. So we made the small, easy promise people make over an unfinished lunch. We would study together. We would sit for the exams together. We would walk into that ridiculous expensive school side by side. I remembered, with a private wince, that I had failed an entrance exam exactly like it the year before. I did not mention that either. Some promises you make even when the evidence is laughing at you, especially then. The forest is where the warm part of this story turns its face away. Half a year past the demon trouble, the goblins had come back in numbers, and my throwing had gotten so absurd by then that a stone in my hand half aimed itself. I had counted closer to 80 that day, where there were usually 50, enough that I meant to report it, when I heard a woman scream somewhere in the trees. I threw before I had decided to run, and ran before the first stone landed. I came through the brush onto a goblin lord and its pack, and the thing was holding a dagger I knew, a plain working dagger with a nick in the guard that I had watched its owner sharpen a dozen times. Graces, and no grace anywhere I could see. I did not think. I had 8 stones in the air across the space of a breath, and when they came down, the lord did not get up, and neither did anything around it. It was over before the fear in my chest had finished arriving, and the fear stayed anyway, because the clearing was empty, and the dagger was on the ground, and I was already blaming myself for every minute I had not been faster. Then she thanked me, from the air, and I nearly threw a stone at the sound. Grace was there, sort of there, faint as breath on cold glass, the trees showing through her like she was a held idea of herself, and she was smiling at me the way you smile when you have just watched someone be afraid for you. It was a skill, her hidden one, the thing she had never shown a soul. A tribute change, she called it, and what it changed her into was a ghost, near enough, a body the world's edges passed straight through. That was how she had slipped the pack. They had swung and hit nothing. She had simply stopped being something a goblin could touch. Most people, she said, going solid again at the edges, color seeping back into her, stopped being able to look at me after they heard what my aptitude was. Lowest grade. You know how that goes. She glanced at me, then away. You never did that. You just treated me like a person who was there. I did know how that went. I knew it down to the bone. We walked back together as the light went. I had spent the whole way to that clearing convinced I had lost her, and the having her back had knocked something loose in me, turned it into a decision before I could talk myself into being reasonable. By the time we run into each other again, I told her, I'll be A rank. She started to say something kind and deflecting, the thing you say to a friend who is reaching too high. It isn't a wish. I said. It's just what's going to happen. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she nodded. And she believed me, which was its own small, dangerous gift. I want to be honest about this part, because of what comes after. That afternoon, I learned that Grace could turn herself into something nothing could lay a hand on. I filed it away as the best news I had heard in a season. I told myself she was safe in a way the rest of us would never be. I want you to remember that the power existed. I want you to remember that it should have been enough. The job came to me by name, and that was the first thing I didn't like about it. People did not request me. People requested whoever had the highest rank and the lowest fee, and I was neither. So when the guild slid a folded slip across the counter and told me a newly opened section of old ruins needed investigating, and that the one who had found it had asked for Grace and me specifically, I read the slip twice and felt the back of my neck go cool. Somebody knew our names. Somebody had picked us out of a whole hall of stronger, louder people and reached past all of them to point at the two of us. I told myself it was probably nothing. I had gotten good at telling myself that. Grace was already waiting at the tree line when I climbed the hill, her greatsword strapped across her back the way she always carried it, like a door she could lean against. She lifted one hand. I lifted mine. We had stopped needing more than that a long time ago. The one who came jogging up the slope behind her undid the cool feeling in my neck and replaced it with something worse, because it was Paul. Paul with his blue mage coat and his easy grin and the wooden staff he still hadn't traded up, even after everything. He'd found the place by accident, he said. An undiscovered gallery under a ruin everyone thought they'd already emptied, too dangerous to walk into alone. So he'd asked for the two people with the strongest bodies he knew. He said it like a compliment. I took it like one then. That was my mistake, and I wanted on the record that I made it gladly, because for about 2 hours, it was just 3 friends going underground to look at old stones. Here is the thing I should have held on to, and didn't. Nobody had ever wanted me for my body before. For most of my life, the whole point of me, as far as the world was concerned, was that there was nothing in me worth wanting. A boy draws the lowest letter on the card, and the message is simple, and it never stops being repeated. You are the absence of something. So when a friend smiled and said he'd reached past every stronger person to choose me, the part of me that had spent years being chosen by no one just leaned into the warmth of it. I didn't ask why someone would lay bait shaped exactly like the thing I'd always wanted to hear. I was too busy being glad to be asked. The ruin was a quiet one. We cleared what little lived in it without breaking stride. There was a small bat thing, a lesser vampire, no bigger than a cat, and I put it down with a single thrown stone before it finished unfolding its wings. Grace gave me a look. I gave her a shrug. The throwing skill had gotten to the point where I barely aimed anymore. The stone went where the threat was, the way water goes downhill. It was somewhere in the second hour that Paul started asking about Emily. It came in sideways at first. Where had I been last week? Who had I been with? Whether Emily and I still took the same road home. I answered the way you answer a friend, which is to say lightly. And that was wrong too, because lightness was oil on whatever was already burning in him. He asked why I kept meeting her alone. He asked it again, sharper. Grace told him to ease up, said she knew he liked Emily, but I'd already told him plain that I wasn't her lover. He didn't hear her. By then, I don't think he could. I have replayed the next few seconds more times than I'll admit. Paul's hand came up, his staff lit. The air went tight the way it does right before a spell lands, and a bolt of force tore across the gallery straight at my chest. I knocked it apart with a stone before it reached me. Then I was inside his guard. I don't remember crossing the distance. I only remember being there, and I tapped 2 fingers against the side of his neck, light, the way you'd wake someone you didn't want to startle. He folded. He did not bleed, and he did not break. He just went down into the dust, breathing, and stayed there. Grace was at my shoulder, great sword half drawn, staring at the friend on the floor like she'd never seen him before. That wasn't him, she said, not a question. She looked at me. Kai, that wasn't him. No, I said, it wasn't. We both knew it. The problem was that knowing it didn't tell us whose it had been. The cold answered first, then the voice. Something rose out of the dark at the far end of the gallery. Not stepped, rose, the way smoke decides to have a shape. And the temperature dropped until my breath ghosted in front of my face. It chided me, in a slow, amused, sing-song way, for asking other people questions before I'd had the manners to introduce myself. I'm giving you the sense of it because I won't give you the sound. The sound got into your back teeth. It named itself. It called itself the manipulator, and it told us, pleased with the weight of the words, that that it was one of the demon lord's 4 heavenly kings, Damian. It let its power show then, just a little, the way a man might open his coat to let you see the knife. And the little was enough to make the floor feel untrustworthy under my boots. And it told us, because it could not help bragging, what it had done to Paul. It hadn't built the jealousy. It had only found it a real thing, a small human thing my friend had been carrying and hating himself for. And it had turned that small thing up like a flame under a pot until Paul couldn't see past it. The wrongness in the gallery hadn't been Paul going bad. It had been Paul being used as a blade with his own hand still on the hilt. I want to be honest about what that did to me, because it's the kind of thing the audience deserves to sit with. Part of me wanted to be furious at Paul, and part of me knew that wasn't fair, and the two parts didn't cancel out. They just sat there, both true, and I couldn't put either of them down. He had felt it. The thing had only made it louder. I still don't know where the line is. I'm not sure there is one. If something reaches into you and turns a real feeling up until it drowns out everything else you are, is the thing it makes you do still yours? Part of me has never stopped arguing both sides of that, and I notice the argument never reaches a verdict, only a tired truce. I have met very few questions that honest, and I did not enjoy meeting this one in the dark with my friend unconscious at my feet. What I knew, standing in that cold, was simpler and uglier than any of that. The war we'd only heard about in rumors, the demon army, the manufactured monsters, the hidden hand none of us could name, had just walked out of the dark and given me its name. So I stopped wondering about lines. I stepped in front of Grace, and I got ready. Grace did not wait to be afraid. That was the kind of person she was. She demanded to know what he wanted with the city, her voice flat and hard, the greatsword already moving off her back. And he told her, in that lazy way, as if it were obvious and a little boring. He wanted strong bodies to wear, and he wanted the city to keep them in. People were clothes to him. He said it the way you'd describe a wardrobe. She didn't dignify it. She told him not to put Paul's name in his mouth. And then she swung, a full overhead cut that would have split a stone pillar, and it landed, and it barely marked him. His skin took the iron like a wall takes a thrown pebble. I saw it not work, and felt the cavern get a great deal larger and colder around the three of us who could die in it. So I went at him myself, full speed, the knife low. That worked better. I opened a real wound across him before he'd finished being amused, and for half a breath I watched a heavenly king look down at his own blood like he'd forgotten he had any. Then he smiled. I felt it more than saw it, and he told me, delighted, that I'd miscounted. It wasn't 2 against 1 anymore. I turned. Grace had gone still, not afraid still, wrong still, the way Paul had been wrong, her eyes gone flat and far away, with a thin dark thread of his will laid over them like oil on water. The greatsword that had been pointed at him was drifting, slow, toward me. He'd taken her. Right out from inside her own skin, he'd taken her, and made it 3 against 1. And the third was the person in the world I least wanted to fight. I have faced a lot of things that wanted me dead. The monster horde in the forest, the archdemon in the cemetery dark. None of them did to me what that did. It is one thing to stand against an enemy. It is something else entirely to watch a friend's body turn towards you with a stranger driving it, to see hands you trusted set themselves to the work of your death, and to know that fighting back means fighting the wrong person while the right one is trapped somewhere behind her own eyes, screaming where you can't hear. I felt my grip go uncertain for the first time all night. Not because I couldn't beat her, because I didn't know how to win a fight where the only way through ran straight over someone I'd have died to protect. He had counted on exactly that. He had built the whole trap out of the fact that I had something to lose, and until that second, I'd been arrogant enough to think a man with my power didn't. Then he buried me. He called them up out of the walls and the floor and the black overhead. The little ones, the mini vampires, bat small and quick and stupid, but there were thousands of them. A living ceiling coming down, and the air turned to leather wings and needle teeth. Any normal person would have been pulled under in a breath. He meant for me to be. He wanted to watch the numbers do what his own hands couldn't. I had been saving this for years and never had a reason loud enough to use it. That is the strange truth about the way I'd lived. Every quiet morning I'd spent doing the same dull thing over and over until the number behind it climbed. Every goblin, every thrown stone, every copy stacked on a copy, while the rest of the world walked past and saw a boy wasting his life on busy work. All of it had been going somewhere. I had just never let anyone watch it arrive. I'd kept the door shut so long I'd half forgotten what was behind it. The swarm coming down on me was the first thing I'd ever met that left me no reason to keep the door shut at all. I brought the shield around and I stopped holding back. Everything I'd stacked, I poured into the cleansed steel on my arm, and I kept back only the thinnest sliver of myself, just enough to still be able to move when it was done. The shield drank it. The holy glow that had been a candle became a sun. It hurt. I'll be honest about that, because nobody ever tells you the strong moments cost anything. Pouring out that much at once was like breathing all the way to the bottom of your lungs and then a little further into the part that isn't supposed to move. My arm went white to the bone behind the steel. My vision narrowed to a tunnel with the light at the end of it, and still I held back that one thin sliver of myself. The habit of years: never empty the cup all the way. Always keep enough to run. Because a man who spends everything is a man who can't take the next step. And I had learned a long time ago that there was always a next step, and it was always coming for me. And then I let it go. I won't pretend I can describe the beam. It was white and it was enormous, and it went through the swarm the way morning goes through fog. When the light cleared, there was no ceiling of wings anymore. There was a scorched, ringing emptiness, motes drifting down through smoke, and the cold not quite so total as it had been. Thousands of them, gone between one breath and the next, and not one of them had touched me. Damian made a sound I'd remember. The swagger went out of him all at once. He wanted to know what I was. He begged it, actually. The menace cracking straight down the middle into something small and shrill. Was I a hero? Was I a sage? What was I? I told him the truth, because the truth was the cruelest thing I owned. I'm just an aptitude G adventurer, I said, and I watched a four-heavenly king not believe me, and be right not to, and be terrified anyway. I pressed him, and he broke. There's no drama I can add to make it more than it was. I threw, and my stones curved the way they always curved now, finding him no matter where he flinched, and each one took something out of him: his footing, then his guard, then the last of the pretense that he was still the predator in the room. He'd come into the dark a heavenly king, the thing that routed 500 armed adventurers and sent 100 of them home in boxes, and the rest home broken. He had been the reason this town slept badly, and he went down in front of me a step at a time until he was on the cold stone with nothing left to summon and nothing left to say, looking up at a boy in dented armor who a town full of people had decided years ago was worth exactly nothing. I want to tell you I felt nothing. That would fit the version of me everyone met first. But standing over him, I felt all of it at once, and I'm not too proud to say so. I thought about the priest who couldn't keep the laugh out of his voice when he read my letter aloud. I thought about my father's face when he decided I was a bad return on his money, and my mother saying nothing beside him, which was its own kind of saying everything. I thought about the clerk who'd looked at a real archdemon's stone on the counter and called me a liar to my face, and shaved the reward to nothing. I thought about Garrick sneering across the guild hall, and about every adventurer who'd put a shoulder into me in a doorway and never once turned around, and about an entire town that had looked at one letter on one card and known, instantly and completely and forever, exactly who I would be. Here is what none of them ever understood, and what the thing on the floor in front of me understood now, far too late. The letter was never the ceiling. It was a door they'd all agreed to keep shut, because a shut door is easier to laugh at than an open one. They had spent years being so sure of what I wasn't that not a single one of them had bothered to find out what I was. And the cost of that certainty was not mine. It had never been mine. It was lying at my feet wearing the shape of a heavenly king, because that was the part that mattered, standing in the ash. None of them had ever been this close to the thing that could actually kill them. None of them had ever, in their whole comfortable, scornful lives, needed me. They had jeered at the goblin killer and gone home to towns the goblin killer kept standing. And here was the strongest thing in the room, a general of the war they whispered about and barred their doors against, the reason 100 armed adventurers never came home, beaten flat into cold stone by the trash they had thrown away on his 12th birthday and never thought about again. I didn't say any of that to him. He wouldn't have heard the right part of it, and there was no one else there I owed the speech to. The satisfaction wasn't in being seen. It was older and quieter than that. It was the simple settling weight of knowing, finally, all the way down, that they had been wrong, every one of them, about the only thing they had ever been sure of. I didn't gloat. There was no one there worth gloating to. I just looked at him a moment longer than I needed to, so that some part of me would believe it had really happened, and then I stepped in to end it, because a thing like him does not get to walk back into the world. That was the moment I had won. I want it marked clearly, because it lasted exactly one step. He spent the last of himself on the one move I never guarded. I felt the air shift behind me, and I had already decided it was nothing. There was nothing left. I'd burned the swarm. I'd broken the king. There was nothing left in that cavern that could reach me. I was wrong by exactly one. A single lesser vampire, the last of the thousands, came out of the dark at my back with a blade. and it would have found me, and it didn't, because Grace got there first. She shoved me, both hands, all her strength, square between the shoulders, and I went down and sideways and out of the line of it, and the blow that had been meant for me found her instead, in the place a heart sits, and she fell. She had the one skill in the world that should have made that impossible. Attribute change, the power to turn to a ghost, to let anything that came at her pass straight through. It was how she'd walked out of the goblin's den that day, with my name still on her lips. It was the reason I had stopped being afraid for her, and it never fired, not once, because the will that would have called it wasn't hers in that second. He had her hands, he had her body. He spent both to put her in front of a knife, and the part of her that could have saved her was locked away behind his thread where she couldn't reach it. I have to think, that the shove was hers, that somewhere under all of it she clawed back enough of herself to push me clear instead of letting him drive her into me. I will never be able to prove it. That not knowing is the wound. It has not closed, because the alternative is the thing I can't carry, and so I don't. The alternative is that he kept her to the very end, that even her last act wasn't hers, that he used the best thing in her, the part that would always step in front of someone she loved, as the final joke. I had spent the whole fight refusing to let him touch me, and he had understood, long before I did, that I was never the soft place. The soft place was the person standing beside me. He didn't beat me. He couldn't. So instead, he made absolutely sure that winning would cost me more than losing ever could have. And the cruelest piece of it, the piece I keep turning over in the dark, is the skill. She had the one power in the world that should have made a blade meaningless. She could have let it pass through her like she was made of evening light. All she'd have needed was a single half-second of her own will, and she had spent her whole life being underestimated for the rank that gave her that gift. And in the one moment it would have saved her life, it was locked behind a door she couldn't reach, because the hand on the door was his. I don't remember crossing to her. I only remember being there, on the scorched stone, with the shield gone dark on my arm, and the smell of cold ash, and the impossible ordinary weight of her, and the cavern so quiet I could hear the last motes of the swarm settling like snow. I had won. I want that on the record too, because it is the cruelest part. I had beaten a heavenly king with the power they all swore I didn't have, and in the same breath, the war had reached past every one of my victories and taken the one thing I hadn't thought to guard. "Grace," I said. She was looking at me. She was still looking at me. The beam took the swarm between one breath and the next, and the cavern went so quiet I could hear my own pulse. For half a second, I let myself believe it was finished. That was the mistake. I always made it in the quiet. I let the quiet lie to me. One of them was still moving. A single lesser vampire, no bigger than a cat, dragging itself across the stone on a folded wing. It did not move the way the dying move. It moved with purpose, and the purpose was not its own. Behind me, flat on the broken floor where I had put him, Damian still had one last thread in his hand, and he spent it. I turned too slow. I had poured everything into the shield and kept back only the sliver I always keep. And the sliver was in my legs and not in my eyes. By the time I saw the small thing lunge, it had already buried its blade where Grace had stepped to cover me. I crossed the floor without deciding to. The puppet came apart under my sword in a single stroke, and I did not watch it fall. I was already on my knees in front of her. My hands knew the shapes of saving people. They had pulled allies out of worse than this. Pressure here, elevation there. The practiced economy of someone who had learned field medicine the hard way. They went through every one of those motions now, fast and certain, and every motion was a lie. I was telling my own fingers, because the thing under my palm was not a wound you treat. It was a wound you sit beside. "Grace." My voice did something I did not recognize. "Grace, look at me." She was looking at me. That was the worst part later, when I had time for worst parts. She was already looking at me like she had been waiting for me to catch up. I had one recovery potion left, the good one, the one we saved. I broke the wax with my thumb and got it past her lips and watched it do nothing. A torn arm, it would have closed. A cracked rib, it would have knitted. It was never made for what had been done to her, and some animal part of me had known that before I broke the seal and had made me do it anyway. "Stay with me," I said. "The church isn't far. I can carry you. I can run the whole way. I've got the legs for it. You've seen me run." She breathed out, slow, and the sound of it told me the truth I was shouting over. She lifted one hand and put it flat against my breastplate, not to push me away, just to feel it, and shook her head. Don't talk like that. My hands were already gathering her up. You're not dying here. Not for me. I don't accept that. You don't get to, she said, and there was the ghost of the old dry humor in it. That's the trouble with you. You think a thing isn't real until you agree to it. I stopped moving. I did not want to jostle her. I held still, the way you hold still, around something you are terrified to spill. She told me to listen, because she only had the once, so I listened. I have listened to that minute every night since. She told me the army out there in the dark was not made of monsters. That was the first thing she wanted me to have. They had homes, she said. They had a side of the line, and they thought we were the ones who had crossed it, the same way we thought it of them. There was justice on both sides of this war, and there was cruelty on both sides of it. And a man who forgot the first half would become the second half without ever noticing the day it happened. So don't forgive them, she said. The words came thin, but they came clear. I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm asking you to stop letting them choose why you fight. I did not understand it then. I want to be honest about that. I was 19 kinds of angry and one kind of breaking, and her words went into me sideways, the way important things do when you are not ready for them. You've been fighting because they laughed at you, she said, because of a priest and a crowd, and two people who should have loved you better. That's a small fire, Kai. It'll keep you warm a while, and then it'll eat you. Fight for yourself, the way you always did when you thought nobody was looking. That's the part of you worth keeping. I told her I would. I would have told her anything, but I think she heard that I meant it because she smiled, and the smile cost her something I could see and could not stop. Good. Her eyes moved over my face, and the humor came back one final time, frail and stubborn. Still can't get over it, you know. A swordsman with a face prettier than half the girls in this town. It isn't fair to the rest of us. I laughed. It came out wrong, wet and broken, but it came out. And that was the last gift I had to give her, that she made me laugh on her way out the door. Look after Emily, she said. She's going to do something with that head of hers. Make sure the world lets her. I will. It was the only promise I have ever made that I would have died to keep. I swear it. Grace, I swear it. She breathed out one more time. She did not breathe in. I have killed things I cannot count. I have stood in front of an army and not blinked. I knelt on that cold floor with the weight of her gone slack against my arms, and I did not know what to do with my hands, because every single thing they knew how to do was useless now, and none of it could undo one small blade and one stolen second. Her skill could have saved her. That is the part that lives under my ribs. The skill that turned her to mist, that let blades pass through her like she was a rumor of a person. It never fired. It needed her will, and Damian had taken her will and pointed her at a sword. The one power in the world built to keep her untouchable could not reach her because the hand on the switch was not her own. She died protecting me with the only thing they had left her, her body. I do not know how long I stayed like that. Long enough that the embers gave out and the cold came up through the stone and into my knees, and I did not move away from it because moving meant agreeing that the part where I held her was over, and I was not ready to agree with the world about anything just then. People talk about grief like it arrives. It does not arrive. It subtracts. It is the absence of a sound you never knew you were leaning on, the absence of her breathing, the absence of the dry little remark she would have made about me kneeling in the dark like a fool with my mouth open. The cavern was full of things that were not there anymore, and the loudest of them, by far, was her. I kept turning her words over, and they would not lie flat. Fight for yourself. Not for the priest who smothered a laugh while a whole hall watched me learn what I was worth. Not for the crowd that jeered. Not for the two people who looked at their own son across a parlor and did the arithmetic and decided he did not balance. She had read the engine I was running on better than I ever had, and she had spent the last breath in her body trying to swap it for a better one because she knew the cheap fuel would take me all the way down to ash, and she did not want to be remembered as one more hand that pointed a torch at me. That was the cruelty of it, the part I could not get past for a long time after. Everyone else in my life had wanted something from me, or wanted nothing for me. She was the first person who, dying, had wanted something for me, and she had used her last seconds on it instead of on herself, instead of on being afraid, instead of on any of the 1,000 things a person is allowed to spend a death on. I did not become someone new on that floor. That is not how people are built. But I made her one promise out loud with my voice, and I made her a second one in the quiet where only I could hear it. The first was Emily. The second was harder, and it was the one she had actually asked for, that I would find out, before I was through, what it meant to fight for myself. Not against the people who threw me away, but for the small stubborn thing in me that had kept getting up anyway. The part she said was worth keeping. I owed her a life. The least I could do was learn how to spend it the way she would have. There is a thing that happens after grief crests, when it has nowhere left to rise. It goes flat, it goes cold. It turns into a list of things that still need doing, and the doing is the only thing holding the rest of you together. I laid Grace down the way you lay down someone sleeping. Then I went and found Damian. He had not gone far. He could not. I had seen to that before the swarm, when I broke him down to the thing he was under all the theater. He was talking before I reached him. He was always talking. He told me, in that lazy sing-song that had not survived the beam, that the blade had not been his hand, that he had only nudged, that none of it was really his fault, the way none of it was ever really anyone's fault in the version of the world he lived in. I did not perform anything for him. I want that understood. There were no implements and there was no show. I pinned him where he lay and I made it plain, in a voice I did not have to raise, exactly how the next few minutes were going to go and exactly how little I had left to lose. Cornered things talk. He talked. He gave me what I needed about the army at his back and the one who sat above the four of them, and I took it and set it aside the way you set aside a tool you will need later but cannot bear to look at now. Then I made sure he would never wear another living person again. It was not mercy and it was not rage. It was arithmetic. The first of the four heavenly kings, the thing that had marched on this town and routed 500 trained adventurers and left 100 of them in the dirt, the thing the whole guild had braced for and prayed about, was gone. And the one who closed the account was the boy they had stamped with the lowest letter in the alphabet and thrown in the gutter on his 12th birthday. I felt none of the things I had once imagined I would feel on a day like that. I had pictured it in the bad years. The vindication, the straightening of the spine. There was none of it. There was a dead friend behind me and a truth I did not want in my hands. And the great enemy of my whole short life turned out to weigh nothing at all when he finally fell. What he had given me was worse than nothing, in a way. I had wanted, for one childish second, for him to be the end of it. The boss at the bottom of the dungeon, the last door. Instead, he had been a door onto a longer hallway. There were 3 more like him, he had said, and a thing above the 3 of them, and a war that had been grinding along behind my whole small life without once needing my permission. I had killed the weakest of 4, and it had cost me grace, and the arithmetic of that, what the other 3 might cost, was a number I made myself stop calculating before it could finish. Then I did the only tender thing left to do. I gathered Grace up properly, the great sword too, because she would have wanted to be carried out with it and not have it left in the dark for some scavenger, and I walked us both up the long stair and out of the ruin. The sky had gone the gray of just before dawn. The birds had not started yet. I carried her down the road toward the town with her blood drying on my breastplate and her words still warm in my ears, and I did not look back at the mouth of the ruin even once. There was nothing in it for me anymore. Everything it had taken, it had already taken. We carried it back to the guild because there was nowhere else to carry it. Claire was behind the counter, and I watched the shape of the newsland on her in stages. First, the disbelief, a 4 heavenly king, here brought down. Then, the leap, before she could stop it, to what it meant, word to the capital, ranks. The kind of leap in standing most adventurers never see in a lifetime. She started to say it, B rank, maybe higher. The words were halfway out and shining. Paul cut them off. He stepped up to the counter and asked her, in a voice scraped raw, to leave his name off the record entirely. Not modesty. He could barely look at the ledger. He asked her to write down Grace's name in the place where his would have gone. She was the reason any of us walked out of that cavern, he said. Put her there. Let the record say she did it. Claire's face changed. I saw the joy catch on something and tear. She set down her pen. She told us quietly that she was sorry, that she had let herself get carried away, that she should have read the room and had not. And then she did the thing that made me trust her years before any of this, and trust her more in that moment. She asked Grace's name, full and correct, and she wrote it herself, slowly, so it would be right. She said the capital could wait a day for its report. She told us to go and rest. I watched the letters go down. Grace's name in the ledger, in the column where the credit goes, in ink that would outlast every one of us. It was a small thing. It was the smallest thing. It was also the only monument she was ever going to get, and Paul had thought of it when I had been too hollow to think of anything at all, and I decided then that I would not forget he had. Claire blotted the page and closed the book, and looked at the 2 of us standing there in our dented armor, and for a moment she was not a guild clerk, and we were not adventurers with a kill to report. We were 3 young people in a quiet room who had lost someone. She did not reach for words to fill it. That, more than the rank she'd nearly handed me, was why I trusted her. I did not feel rested. I did not feel anything I could name, but I felt, for the first time since the cavern, that I was standing in a room with people who understood that a number on a card was the smallest thing that had happened that night. Paul came apart at the inn. He had held it through the streets and through the stairs, and the second the door shut, he folded onto the edge of the bed and put his face in his hands and said it was his fault, that he had been useless out there, worse than useless, that Damian had reached into him and turned his own jealousy into a leash, and he had let himself be walked, and Grace had paid the bill. I told him that wasn't true. I told him a man doesn't get to take credit for a hand that was forced onto the knife. He didn't hear it. Guilt has bad ears, so he asked me to hit him. He said it plainly, the way you ask for something you have already decided you deserve. He said he needed to feel it land somewhere. He needed the weight to have a place to go, or it was going to live in him and rot. I can't do that, I said. He asked again. He said please, and the word broke in the middle. And here is the thing I am not proud of and will not pretend away. Somewhere under the grief, in a place I had been refusing to look at, there was a thin, ugly thread of blame in me too. Not fair, not true, but there. And I think Paul knew it was there, maybe before I did, and I think that was half of why he asked. Fine, I said. One, just one. I hit him once, not a tap. He had not asked for a tap. He took it square and went sideways and stayed down a moment, and when he came back up, something in his face had loosened, and something in my chest had loosened with it, the thread paying out and gone. We did not talk about it. We sat in that small orange room while the candle burned down, two people who had loved the same dead friend, and let the silence do the rest. I have turned that punch over more than a man should turn over the memory of hitting his friend. There are people who would call it cruel. A grieving man asking another grieving man to hurt him, and the second one saying yes. Maybe it was, but there is a kind of pain that has to be made real before a person can set it down, and Paul could not set down what he would not let himself feel, and I could not let go of what I refused to admit I was holding. One honest blow did what an evening of kind words never would have. I am not telling you it was right. I am telling you it was true, and that afterward we could both breathe again, and that has to count for something. It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was the beginning of the thing that would stand between me and the world for years after, the brother I did not ask for and would not give back. I learned the rest of it later, the way you learn about weather that has already decided to come for you. I am setting it here because this is where it began turning toward me, in a hall I had never seen, among people who now knew my name. Three of them met in the dark. The fourth chair was empty, and the empty chair was the point. A dryad attendant gave the report in a flat, dutiful voice. The manipulator had fallen, defeated, in a ruin, by a pair of low-ranked human adventurers. One dead, a tall woman with a greatsword, one alive, a small silver-haired swordsman the guild had ranked near the bottom. The first of them treated it as a joke. Damian had always been the weakest of the four, he said. Losing to vermin was simply the shape of being weak and good riddance. The second did not laugh. The second was the careful one, and the careful one pointed out the part the first had skated past, that whatever the boy's rank said, anything that could put down even the least of the four heavenly kings was not vermin, and pretending otherwise was how the rest of them would end up in empty chairs too. The third said almost nothing. The third only asked for the name, twice, until the dryad gave it cleanly. And then the third spoke of me the way a man speaks of a present he has decided to unwrap slowly, with a soft, cruel patience, hoping the new toy would last, hoping it would not break too quickly when the playing started. There is a particular horror in being spoken about by people who intend to take you apart, and who are in no hurry about it. I would carry the weight of that conversation for a long time before I ever learned its exact words. The sense of being a name on a list in a room I had never stood in, of having stepped, with one impossible night, out of the ranks of things too small to bother with and squarely into the ranks of things worth hunting. I had spent my whole life wanting to be seen. It had never once occurred to me to be careful about who did the seeing. They put a price on my head that night. I did not know it yet. I was asleep at the inn with my friend a wall away, and a dead woman's last words turning over in the dark behind my eyes. But the war had finally looked up from its map and found one small name, and it had decided to come and collect. For the first time, I was not the one doing the hunting. The knight commander had the kind of patience that came from asking hard questions for a living. He sat across a plain table from us, hands folded, and walked us back through the ruins one more time. What we had gone there to do, what we had found instead, how a four heavenly king ended up dead in the dark with the two of us still breathing. I gave him the short version. We went to train. We ran into Damian. We stopped him. I left the rest where it belonged, in the dark, off the page of anything anyone would ever read aloud. Paul filled in the parts about the demon army, that Damian had fought at first and then, cornered, given up what he knew. The commander wrote it down without flinching. "So you went out to train, crossed a heavenly king, and put yourself between him and the town." He set his pen down. "I understand. We're grateful, more than I can put on a form." He thanked us the way men thank you when they know the thanks isn't enough, and then he left. I sat there a moment in the gray light, and the empty chair beside me was very loud. Grace should have been in it, complaining about the questions. She wasn't. She was never going to be again. I had gotten used to a lot of absences in my life. I was not used to that one yet. Paul caught me looking at the chair and didn't say anything, which was the kindest thing he could have done. We had not really talked about it, the two of us. There hadn't been room. The kingdom wanted its heroes smiling for the announcement, and grief doesn't sit well next to a celebration, so we'd folded ours up small and carried it where it wouldn't show. I was getting good at that. I'd had practice. The next day, the kingdom made it official. They announced us as heroes. The word felt like a coat cut for someone else's shoulders. The town threw a feast, because that is what towns do when they finally have something to be proud of. There were lanterns strung between the rooftops and long tables sagging under more food than I had seen in the first 3 years I lived here hungry. The mayor toasted the rise of the town's new heroes, and people cheered, and for a while it was almost nice. It didn't take long for the muttering to start. It always found me. Somewhere under the cheering, there was a low current of it, that a low aptitude nobody like me could not possibly have done what they said, that I was riding Paul's coattails, that the whole thing was a story someone made up. I had been the rank G joke of this town for a long time. A feast was not going to undo that overnight, and I had stopped expecting it to. Derek found me near the edge of the lantern light. He was the blonde one, mid-20s, broad through the shoulders, a longsword he kept polished so people would look at it. Years ago, he had been one of the loudest, the kind who shoved a smaller kid into the dirt at the guild door and spat after him so his friends would laugh. Tonight, he came up wearing a smile, all warmth, like we were old friends who'd simply lost touch. He said he was impressed. He said a man like me ought to have people looking out for him, and that he could be one of them if I played it smart. I told him to do whatever he wanted and turned back to my drink. That was the wrong answer as far as his pride was concerned. The smile curdled. The warmth went out of him all at once, and what was left underneath was the same boy from the guild door, older and angrier, and used to being obeyed. He said something ugly about teaching me my place. Then his hand went to the polished sword, and it came out, and he swung it at me in front of the whole square. I caught the blade on one finger. I want to be honest about how little it cost me. There was no flourish to it, no clever counter. I lifted one finger, and the edge stopped against it like it had hit a wall, and then I flicked my hand, the way you flick a fly off a table, and Derek left his feet. He went over a bench and skidded across the flagstones and came to rest against the leg of a table, blinking up at the lanterns, his sword ringing somewhere out in the dark. Not a scratch on him, not a scratch on me. That was the point. The boy who had once put me in the dirt was, at the end of all of it, a one-finger problem. I remembered the version of myself who used to live under that boy's boot, the one who ate the dirt at the guild door while Derek's friends laughed, who got up and said nothing because saying something only ever cost more. He had promised himself, lying there, that one day it would be different. I'd half forgotten the promise. He hadn't. Somewhere in me, he watched Derek slide across the flagstones and finally, quietly, let it go. The square had gone very quiet. I picked my drink back up. The muttering, I noticed, had stopped. I thought that was going to be the worst of it. I was wrong, the way you are always wrong about which door the worst thing comes through. They came through the bright one, my parents. I knew them before I let myself know them. The set of my father's shoulders, the particular green of my mother's good dress, the one she wore when she wanted to be seen. They came toward me through the parting crowd with their arms a little open, their faces already arranged into something soft and proud, and my mother was saying my name like it was a word she had always loved. For a moment, I could not hear the feast at all. The lanterns kept swinging. Somewhere behind me, a fiddle was still going, half a beat out of time with my own pulse, and a child laughed near the food tables. The whole bright ordinary night went on around the two of them as they crossed the square, and I stood very still inside it, the way you stand still when something you buried walks back into the light wearing its good clothes. You have to understand what I was looking at. When I was 12, in a church not far from here, a priest read out one letter and the room laughed, and these two people decided in the space of an afternoon that I was a bad investment. Not a bad day, not a hard road, a bad investment, a thing you cut loose to stop the losses. They had me out of the house before the candles burned down. For 3 years after, when I passed them on the street, my father would look at the empty air just to the left of me and tell whoever he was with that the skillless one was somehow still alive. My mother would not look at all. And now, here they were, both of them looking, finally, with their whole faces. My father laughed warmly and told the people nearest us obvious that of course the boy was brilliant. He was their blood. After all, what did anyone expect? My mother reached for my hands and said we should be a family again, that they had a room waiting for me, that she would love me properly now. The word did all the work the way it always had. They had not come back for the boy in the dirt. They had come back for the hero, because the hero was worth something, and a thing that is worth something is a thing you collect. It was the same transaction as the disowning. They had only run the math the other direction. I looked at my mother's hands, reaching, and I did not take them. "Forgive me," I said. The square was so quiet I didn't have to raise my voice. "Who are you exactly? I don't have parents?" The words came out level. I'd half expected my voice to shake. I'd shaken in front of these two people my whole childhood, and it didn't. And that steadiness told me more about how far I'd come than any rank on any card ever could. I had imagined, somewhere in the years between, that saying it would feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like setting down something I had been carrying so long, my arms had forgotten any other shape. I had thought the weight was anger. It wasn't. It was hope. The stubborn, stupid 12-year-old hope that someday they would come back because they wanted me, the son, and not the trophy. Refusing them killed that hope cleanly, and I was surprised by how much lighter I stood without it. My mother's face came apart in stages. The warmth first, then the performance under it, then the thing under that, which was not grief for a son, but anger at a closed door. She snapped at me. She told me I was being cruel after everything they'd done. Everything they'd done. I turned the phrase over and found nothing inside it. There had been a priest who couldn't keep a laugh behind his teeth while he read my rank to a room full of strangers. There had been a morning my father totaled up what my schooling and my gear had cost and decided the sum was a loss he wasn't going to keep paying. That was the everything. That was the whole account. They had spent 12 years expecting a return, and the day the return looked bad, they'd written me off and slept fine. And now the return had come in spectacular, and here they were at the window, asking after their shares. I almost laughed, and the only reason I didn't is that the laugh would have come out wrong, with something wet in it, and they did not get to see that. My father started to bluster. He started to talk about respect, about blood, about how a son owed. Paul stood up. I had never heard the square get quieter than it already was, but it managed. Paul was not a big man, and he was red in the face, and his voice cracked once at the start, and none of that mattered, because he meant every word, and the whole town could hear it. "Don't you dare," he said. "You threw him away. You don't get to stand here and talk about family. You don't get to say the word love in front of him." He pointed, his hand shaking, at my mother, then my father. He was 12. He was a kid, and you put him out like spoiled meat, and now he's worth something so suddenly you remember you've got a son? No. Get out, both of you, before I forget I'm a guest here. My mother drew breath to answer him and found nothing in the whole bright square on her side. People were watching now, all of them, and the watching had turned. A town loves a hero, but a town loves a story even more, and the story had just rearranged itself into something they understood in their stomachs. The parents who threw the boy away come crawling for the leftovers. My father's face went a blotched, ugly color. He took my mother's elbow. They left the way people leave when the floor has tilted under them, and they're pretending it hasn't. Too fast and too stiff. Out through the bright door they'd come in by. Nobody cheered. That surprised me. A crowd will cheer almost anything if you hand it a villain and a clean ending. But the square just held its breath and let it out slow. And the mayor, who a moment ago had been all toasts, found something very interesting to study in the bottom of his cup. The story they'd tell tomorrow had rewritten itself in real time, in front of them, and everyone there knew it, and not one of them wanted to be remembered as having stood on the wrong side of it. The ones who'd been muttering that I was a fraud a few minutes earlier were the quietest of all. I caught a couple of them studying their boots, and I understood that they had just watched two different kinds of people get turned away from me in the space of one evening. The bully who wanted to own me, and the parents who wanted to reclaim me, and that some part of them had run the arithmetic and decided they did not want to be the third. It was not forgiveness. I didn't need their forgiveness. It was something simpler and colder. They had finally decided I was real, and that the wrong side of me was not a place anyone sensible wanted to stand. I stood with Grace's absence on one side of me and Paul, breathing hard, on the other. Somewhere, a lantern guttered. I thought about the boy in the church, the one who had hoped so hard for one stupid hour, and I wanted to tell him it was over now, that the verdict had finally been answered, not by the king, not by a rank on a card, but by a door I had closed myself with my own hand, while while they watched. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had finally been allowed to put something down. "Thanks," I said to Paul. He scrubbed at his eyes with the back of his wrist and pretended it was the lantern smoke. "Yeah," he said. "Well?" Paul spent the next morning convinced he'd ruined everything. He found me in the lane behind the square, where I'd gone to get away from the last of the well-wishers, and he was wretched about it, sure that blowing up at my parents in front of the whole town had somehow made things harder for me, that he'd turned my reckoning into his scene. He kept starting sentences and not finishing them. "I shouldn't have blown up like that," he finally got out. I couldn't stand them, standing there, smiling at you. "I know. I'll make it right. I swear, whatever you need, Paul." I stopped him. "You don't have to make anything right. You said the thing I couldn't. That's not something you apologize for." It took him a couple of hours to actually believe me, which is about how long it always took Paul to climb down from anything. We walked and we talked, and the heat of the night before bled off into something easier. Near the end of it, he was almost himself again, enough to needle me. Said that with a face like mine, half the town still couldn't decide if I was a swordsman or some lord's runaway daughter, and I'd better not go breaking hearts I didn't mean to. It was a weak joke, and we both knew it, and we both let it land anyway, because the alternative was the silence where Grace's laugh used to go. 2 days later, the guild called me in, and Claire was sitting behind the big desk. It still caught me a little, seeing her there. The first time I ever walked into that hall, a rank G nobody everyone else was already laughing at. She was the one staff member who didn't. She defended me when defending me cost her something. Now, she was the guild master, and she waved me into a chair like she'd been expecting me for years. "I'm Claire, the guild master now," she said, mostly because she enjoyed saying it. "No need to look so nervous. I just have something to tell you." I braced for the usual. A correction, a deduction, a clerk explaining why my reward was actually smaller than it looked. Old habits. "You're being promoted," she said, "straight to A rank." I sat there for a second, sure I'd misheard. A rank? Couldn't I just make B? No, she didn't even pretend to consider it. "You put down a 4 heavenly king. That's a thing most A rank adventurers wouldn't survive being in the same valley as. I can't leave you at C. I can't even leave you at B with a straight face. So, A rank. Skipping B entirely. Try to look a little less like I've sentenced you to something." I said. "Thank you, I think." I should have been able to enjoy it. The boy ranked below the bottom of the world, jumped 2 ranks at once by the one person in that hall who had ever taken his side. But there is a strange thing that happens when the world finally agrees you were worth something all along. Part of you wants to ask where that opinion was when you needed it, and the rest of you is too tired to bother. I'd spent so long being told I was nothing that being told I was rare just sounded like a different person describing a different boy. She was enjoying this though. I could tell she was enjoying this. Then, she slid a sheet of paper across the desk and told me that A-rank adventurers carry an epithet, a name the guild recognizes, the thing people shout in taverns, and that I could choose my own or leave it to the guild. I made the mistake of telling her to let the guild decide. She read the list out loud. I am not going to repeat the list. It was the kind of list that made me understand, deep in my chest, that some decisions are too important to delegate. By the 3rd suggestion, I had decided that I would be choosing my own name after all, thank you, and that I would be doing it before anyone wrote any of those onto an official document where children might one day read it. I picked the name myself, in the end. I thought about the church and the one letter that had been hung on me without my say, the letter that decided what I was before I'd thrown a single stone. I thought about how every label I'd ever worn had been handed to me by someone who'd already made up their mind, and I decided that this one at least was going to be mine. "All right then," I told Claire. "How about Valkyrie?" She signed off on it on the spot, and something in the way she smiled said she'd known I'd come around. Then she gave me the real news under the news. The king himself had summoned Paul and me to the capital to be rewarded in person. We were to travel at once, so we rode. The better part of a day in a swaying carriage, Paul talking the entire way. He'd made B rank himself, and he was proud of it in a way that was impossible not to like. And he kept saying he couldn't believe it, that I'd only been an adventurer for about a year and a half, and here we were rolling toward a king. I let him talk. The talking was good. It filled the seat where a 3rd voice should have been. Grace would have hated the carriage. She'd have complained about the springs and the dust and the way Paul never stopped, and she'd have meant none of it, and the seat would have been full. I watched the road instead. Then the capital came up over the rise, and even Paul went quiet. I had never seen anything like it. High white walls, towers stacked higher than any building had a right to stand, and above all of it, hanging in the open air with nothing holding it up at all. A great structure simply floating, catching the afternoon light. I must have made some sound, because the driver chuckled, proud of his city the way only a man who lives in its shadow can be. "Those towers up there," he said, "a man from another world taught them how to raise. Built a machine that drinks the magic right out of the air to keep them aloft. Old Walter, he called him. Said it the way you say a name everybody knows. Walter. The name landed somewhere I wasn't braced for, and the floating city blurred for a second at the edges of my attention, because I knew that name. I knew the old man it belonged to. He was no stranger from a legend. He was someone out of my own small life, someone I had not let myself think about in a long time, and hearing him spoken of as the genius who held the capital up in the sky opened a door in me I'd kept shut for years, onto questions about where men like him came from, and how, and whether I had ever really belonged to this world the way everyone around me seemed to assume. The carriage rolled on toward the gates. The boy who had been ranked below the bottom of the world was riding into its heart, summoned by its king, under a name he'd chosen himself, with the towers floating overhead like the world had decided to show off. I should have felt finished. I didn't. I had paid one debt down to its last copper, and I could feel, somewhere out past all this light, the weight of all the ones I hadn't. 3 heavenly kings who knew my name now, a bounty with my face on it, and a war that had only just noticed I existed. But that was tomorrow's arithmetic. Today, the gates were opening, and for the first time in my life, the people on the other side of them were looking up to watch me come in. Paul and I split up the moment we passed through the Capitol gates. He wanted the great cathedral, the jewels, and the colored glass. I wanted the one place I had been promising myself since I was a boy who owned nothing but a humiliating letter. Aldrich Academy was bigger than any guild hall I had ever stood in. Whole fields of students drilled in the open air, throwing mid-rank magic at straw targets like it was nothing, like the ground itself owed them the power. I stood at the rail and watched and felt the old ache, the one that had walked me out of a church on my 12th birthday and never quite left. That was when the boy found me. He was short and dark-haired, and he carried himself like the world had already agreed he mattered. He looked me over, decided I was no one, and told me so with a smile. He had drawn a fine aptitude. He wanted me to know that. Then, he asked after mine, the way you ask a question you already plan to laugh at. It's the lowest grade, actually, I said. The laugh came right on cue. He couldn't believe the lowest grade was even real. He had thought it was a story they told to scare children. He went on for a while about how far above me he sat, how the gap between us was a thing of nature. And then, without taking a breath, he leaned in close like he was handing me a secret and told me the most exciting thing in the kingdom. Some student from a lower year, he said, some nobody, had gone and killed one of the demon lord's 4 heavenly kings, alone. Could I imagine it? Could I even imagine being that strong? I looked at this boy gushing about the man who had done it, to the man who had done it, and I felt the corner of my mouth move. Ha, I said. Good for you. I left him there, glowing with secondhand glory, and I let him keep it. Somewhere a priest had stifled a laugh at a letter on a page, and a whole room had decided who I would be for the rest of my life. They had all been so sure. It still amazed me how sure people could be about a thing they had never once bothered to look at. Paul was waiting where we'd agreed, still half drunk on the cathedral. He described every window twice. I let him, because it was good to hear him sound like himself again, after everything. The towers were the thing, though. Whole sections of the Capitol hung in the air, stone and glass floating as if weight were a rule that only applied to the rest of us. I must have been staring, because the driver who took us toward the castle started talking without being asked. All of it, he said, came from one man, an inventor, someone who had come from another world entirely, who built machines that drank magic and turned it into the thing that held the towers up. The driver said the name the way people say the name of a legend they've never met. Walter. I sat very still. I knew a Walter, an old man with a giant gentle dog named Comet, and a rambling fondness for anyone who would sit and listen. I had walked that dog. I had taken the job because no one else respected it, and I needed the coin. And the whole time I had thought he was just a lonely old eccentric with a soft heart and a sad story he'd half forgotten. I didn't say anything to the driver. I just filed it away, the way I'd learned to file everything away. The world was stranger than the letter it had handed me. It always had been. And because the road was long and quiet, my mind did the thing it kept doing now when there was nothing to fill it. It went to Grace. I remembered her story, the one she'd told in pieces over months. Orphaned young, a blade taken up not for glory, but to feed a younger sibling. The sibling tricked away from her by people who knew exactly how to use a desperate girl, and no amount of work, no number of jobs, enough to buy them back. And then Marcus, a noble who could have looked away and didn't. He listened. He found the sibling. He gave them honest work and a roof and a life. And he asked Grace for nothing. That was why she trusted our party, because Marcus was in it. She built her faith one careful person at a time, and she gave it to me, and she died with her body between me and a blow that had been meant for my chest. The towers floated over the Capitol, beautiful and impossible, and I rode toward a king with her name sitting in my throat. They made us wait in a hall lined with antiques worth more than the town I grew up in. Paul kept his hands pressed flat to his sides like he was afraid of knocking a vase into history. I didn't blame him. Then the doors opened, and a voice told us to enter, and we walked into the throne room of the kingdom. The king was a short, stout man, and dignified the way only someone who has never once doubted his place can be. The court stood in ranks along the walls, silk and gold and cold, curious eyes. All of them turned on the two of us. He praised the fall of the four-heavenly King Damian. He named it a service to the whole realm, a blow struck for every living person under his crown, and he said it in the formal ringing way of men who are used to their words being written down. He rewarded us 500 gold coins, a masterwork one-handed sword, an enchanted staff, and when he spoke the names of those who had earned the kingdom's thanks, he spoke Grace's name among them, though she was not there to hear it. I stood on the marble and let it land. A church once, a priest who couldn't keep the laugh off his face, a letter, the lowest grade ever recorded, a rank below the bottom of the chart, and a whole crowd of strangers laughing at a 12-year-old until he believed them. Parents who had looked at that letter and decided their son was a bad investment and put him out the door before the day was finished. And now a king, the highest man in the world, standing to honor that same boy in front of his entire court. I had spent years telling myself I didn't need this. That recognition was a thing other people wanted, that I only wanted to be left alone to grow strong in the dark. Standing there, I understood I had been lying, a little. The boy who walked out of that church had wanted exactly one thing, underneath everything else. He had wanted to stand somewhere the people who wrote him off would have to look up to see him. He was standing in it now, and it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like weight, because the only person I wanted to turn and look at to say, "Can you believe this?" was in the ground because of a war this king was thanking me for fighting. Paul stood beside me with his spine very straight, not quite breathing, awed in a way I had lost the ability to feel. I tried to see it through his eyes. A king, a throne, gold and a master-forged blade, and the whole court of the realm holding still to honor a friend of his. To him, it was the top of the world, and he was standing on it. To me, it was an answer to a question asked in a church years ago by an old man with a long beard who couldn't keep the laugh off his face. Back then, a single letter had been enough for a room full of strangers to decide everything I would ever be. Here, in the grandest room in the kingdom, no one laughed. No one asked to see the letter first. The letter did not exist in this room. There was only the thing I had done with the life it was supposed to have ruined, and a king bowing his head toward it. I had always told myself that recognition was something other people needed. Standing in it, I learned the truth. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting down something so heavy I'd forgotten I was carrying it. The boy who walked out of that church got to stop walking, just for a moment. That was all it was. That was everything it was. I bowed my head and took the honor in her name and said almost nothing and let the silence carry what I couldn't. The celebration was worse than the audience. Music came from somewhere behind the curtains, played by people I never saw, and the nobles closed in like the tide. They started with the battle. How had I done it? Was it true? What was a heavenly king like up close? I gave them less than they wanted. Then, the way these things always turn, the questions stopped being about the battle and started being about me, about my future, about which of their daughters might be attached to it. One man would not let go. He had a daughter. I simply must meet her. He said it again, and I felt my patience thin to a wire. I caught sight of the dark-haired boy from the academy across the hall. He'd worked out who I was, somewhere between the field and here. He spent the whole evening studying the floor and never once met my eyes. Then a hand landed on my shoulder, easy and certain, and Hugo's voice cut clean through the noise. "He looks exhausted, gentlemen." He was already steering me away. Surely a little rest before all this talk. He didn't stop until we'd reached a quiet corner where the music was only a rumor. Then he grinned at me, like a man enjoying a private joke. "You were a noble this whole time, Hugo?" I shook my head. "You could have warned me." He let that sit, pleased with himself. If anyone asked, he said, we had slipped off to arrange a training match, a cover, so no one read anything into two men talking alone. I told him that was fine, and then he offered the thing that made the whole gilded, miserable evening worth it. "How about this?" he said, leaning in. "I'll teach you a skill almost no one knows, flash step." He watched my face. "All it'll cost you is a match." I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. We set the terms simply, first to fall or to surrender lost. He asked if that suited me. "Yes, those terms are fine," I said. He came out faster than he had in our first bout, and I matched him, blade to blade, and I saw the flicker of surprise cross his face. He told me, almost admiringly, that only his order's captain could cross swords with him like this. Then he reached for the skill I remembered, the one that doubled his speed, and the world tilted into a blur. The smart thing was not to trade. I knew the secret of that boost from the last time we'd fought, the one thing he most regretted telling me. It ran on a timer. So I didn't try to win the exchange. I dropped into pure defense and made myself a wall. He landed blow after blow, more than 100 of them, ringing off my guard, driving me back, driving me down to one knee while he poured everything he had into the seconds he'd bought himself. I let him spend them, and then the skill ran dry, all at once, the way I'd been waiting for. His speed fell off a cliff. For half a breath, he was just a man with a sword, no faster than anyone, and I was already moving. One counter, clean. He went sprawling across the boards and lay still. When he came to, he laughed before he even opened his eyes. There, that's my... He stopped, looked at where he was lying. Fine, I surrender. No, I said. The loss is yours, Hugo. Then, because I couldn't quite help it, want to keep going? He just laughed harder, flat on his back, and called me something unkind and fond. He made good on the bet in a quiet spot where no one could overhear. Flash step, he explained, cost almost no magic, a heartbeat of delay, then a short jump forward, about a single stride. Not teleportation, he was careful to say. True teleportation took far longer to call up and cost a fortune to reach a place you'd marked. This was small and fast and close. It was also, he told me, a secret the royal family kept on purpose, taught to a chosen few, guarded so that no one could simply step through the walls of a noble's estate or a king's chamber. The few who taught themselves the thing got quietly folded into the Night Order before they could become a problem. Then, he gave me the condition to learn it. Defeat an enemy within 1 second of first detecting it. I turned that over. Brutally hard, not impossible. The kind of thing a person might even stumble into by accident in the right desperate moment and never understand what they'd unlocked. I understand, I said. This stays between us. Absolutely, he said. And for once, there was no ease in it. And don't you ever use it where people can see. I didn't tell him what my skill could do to a thing like Flash Step. That every time I met the condition, my duplication would stack it, halving the cost and the delay, doubling the reach again and again, until a one-stride hop became something no royal secret was ever meant to be. Some things you keep, even from the people you trust. He'd taught me that himself, on the training ground, regretting every word he'd ever explained. I came back to the party to find Paul squared off against a knot of nobles, his jaw set, his voice climbing. He was in love with Emily, he was telling them, and he wouldn't pretend otherwise. They had been pushing some arranged match at him, a daughter of the right blood, and they had made the mistake of dismissing Emily out loud, a commoner beneath their notice, beneath their name. I crossed the room fast, clamped a hand over his mouth, and hauled him bodily out onto the balcony before he could say the one more sentence that would have ended him. Hey, seriously, stop, right now. Out in the cool dark, I told him the truth flat. Insulting nobles in their own hall, in front of their peers, could get a commoner executed. It didn't matter that he was right. It mattered that he was breathing. He vented at the night air. They'd called Emily lowly, beneath them, as if a person's worth came stamped on them at birth, in a single letter, and never changed no matter what they did with their one life. I knew that song better than anyone alive. I let him finish it. You should be praising me, he muttered finally, deflating. I didn't even throw a punch. The party wound down after that, without anyone dying, which I counted as a clean success. Heading out into the night, I took stock of what the capital had given me. New weapons, 500 gold, and the secret of Flash Step, quietly multiplying in the dark where no one could see it grow. About half a year went by. Damian fell, the capital faded behind me, and the day came that mattered more to Emily than any of it. Her entrance exam for Aldrich Academy. She was a wreck. I'd never seen her hands shake like that. So before they called her in, I pressed something into her palm, a charm I'd had made, a real dragon scale set into it. People say dragon scales carry luck, because dragons are said to be born with more of it than anything alive. It doesn't actually work. I told her it did anyway. This wasn't cheap, you know, I said. She tried to laugh and didn't quite manage it. It's fine, I told her. You've put in the work. Show them what you can do and you'll pass. I did my best. She closed her hand around the scale. I'm really going to do this. A few days later, she came running back across the yard, waving a paper over her head before she could even get the words out. I did it! I passed! She showed me the acceptance letter and the uniform folded over her arm like something holy. Her practical score had been low, she admitted. She'd never been a fighter, but she had placed 5th on the written exam. 5th out of all of them. Behind her, a dark-haired boy who had not passed was making the whole yard listen to it. He howled that it was absurd, that someone of his rank failing was a joke, that they had to let him take it again. 2 teachers got hold of him and walked him off, still shouting. Aptitude, he kept saying, as if the word were a key that had stopped working in a lock he'd been promised it would open. I'd stopped being surprised by that a long time ago. It used to make me angry, that word, the way they all clutched it like a birthright. Now, it mostly made me tired on their behalf. They'd been handed a high letter and told it was who they were, and the first time the world asked them to actually be something, the letter had nothing to say. Emily had been handed nothing, and she'd built herself fifth out of every applicant in that hall with a year of late nights and a stubbornness that put mine to shame. Emily turned back to me, and the bravado went out of her all at once. Kai, it's because of you. Thank you for studying with me all year. Yeah, I looked at her, this person who had decided what I was worth without ever once checking the letter first. Take care of yourself at the academy, Emily. I'll catch up before long. She lit up like the sun had come back out. A week later, we saw her off at the gate. Marcus gave her a new dagger, plain and good. The kind of gift that means look after yourself. Paul gave her flowers and then had to look very hard at the horizon for a while. The party that was left, the family that was left after Grace, all of it standing in the morning light to watch one of us go on ahead. I didn't have a speech. I'd given her the charm and the promise already, and those were the true things. She climbed up, and the cart pulled out toward the Capitol and the floating towers, and the life she'd earned with a year of work and a written exam, and she waved until the road bent and took her out of sight. I'd quietly stacked Flash Step 100 times over by then, folding it through my duplication in private until a single stride had become something else entirely. I was a recognized hero now. I had a rank and a name I'd chosen myself, and weapons a king had put in my hands. And I keep faith with Grace the only way left to me. She told me, at the end, to see the war from both sides, to fight for myself and not for hatred, to look after Emily. I am trying to do all three, which is harder than any of them sounds. Marcus and Paul went back through the gate ahead of me, talking low, and I stayed at the roadside longer than I needed to. The dust held the shape of the cart for a moment and then forgot it. I thought about how small the party had gotten, and how much I had come to need the people still in it, and how I had learned that lesson in the worst possible way, kneeling on a cave floor with Grace's hand going cold in mine. Grief doesn't leave, it just changes what you do with your hands. Mine had gotten very good at keeping people alive, because none of it is finished. There is a price on my head. The Demon Lord's army put it there the day Damian fell, and his 3 brothers are still out in the world, patient and cruel, and they have not forgotten the boy who killed the first of them. The Demon Lord himself has not even shown his face, and somewhere across the border, in the kingdom of Marland, a girl has woken with the hero's skill in her hands, and no one yet knows what that will mean. Killing one of the 4 heavenly kings hadn't closed the account, it had opened a larger one. Grace had told me, at the end, to see this war from both sides, and I was trying, even now, even knowing the other side had marked me for it. She had looked at the things we fought and seen, in her last breath, something more tangled than monsters. I didn't know yet whether I could carry that the way she had, but I owed it to her to try. I stood at the gate